I will call the meeting to order. It is 4 o'clock on February 15th, 2021, and we are in the boardroom here with a policy committee meeting, and I'm the chair of the policy committee. Other members of the policy committee are Chris Swigert and Paul Fisher, and they are both here. And our superintendent, Jim Wimmer, is here, and our director of technology, Tim Harder, is in the room as well. We don't have anybody else from the public joining us, but maybe somebody will click on the video later on down the road and watch it when we post it. So, Superintendent, can I have you confirm that this meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Great. And on our agenda tonight, we have a lot of different policy discussion around developing the policy and philosophies, kind of a policy review cycle and calendar, and then a specific discussion on policy 151, which is formulation, adoption, and deletion of policies, and then several other policies we'll touch on tonight for recommendations on review, revisions, things like that. So as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in a regular school board meeting, we haven't had a policy committee meeting in a while, but that doesn't mean that our superintendent hasn't been taking a hard, long look at policies, and she is ready to start going through policies with our committee. And so that brings us to our first policy meeting in a while. Are you here to watch this?
The front door is locked. Do you need me to unlock it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yep, thank you very much. So, Superintendent, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, so I first wanted to start, since this is our first round together, to talk about the process and philosophy behind policy. And for the public's viewing, if you're watching this now or later, if you go into board docs, everything is there. And you can see the Wisconsin Association of School Boards provides a purpose of policy. We're a policy governance board, and that's the foundation of everything we do. So when I ask about the philosophy, we want to make sure that we're certainly up to date with all of our legal requirements. We want to make sure that they're clearly understood by our public. There's a lot of language that does need to be in them, but they're publicly accessible on our website. All policies are, and they're used for not just our families, our students, maybe our community, and our administrators as we navigate the operations then behind the policy in the district. And then we want to make sure that there's something that we can follow. We're not writing a vision statement, we're writing something that's actually a driver of how we do things. So philosophy-wise, it's generally more is less, being in attention to those things. So is there anything from the committee that I should be aware of regarding kind of that foundational philosophy as we move forward in development or review?
Can you describe, the district has a subscription philosophy as it relates to policies. There are other organizations. Can you kind of give an overview of that and how that might influence our process?
Absolutely. I think it's important to know that we are not just writing policy on our own. We have a legal team behind us. So there's several ways that districts can subscribe to different services. So there's Neola is a common one. We choose to subscribe to the service directly through the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, and that's an annual cost. And then behind all the templates that they create, and they give you lots of options, but they also provide legal guidance. I can pick up the phone and call a team of lawyers at no cost to our district. It's all part of that package. They are sending us all the updates to be aware of, what you need to review. The statute was just changed. They are tracking and monitoring that as part of that service and send us those updates so we know while we might have a cycle of review, just as we're doing tonight, hey, I'm going to put the ones that are kind of required right in front of us because those are priorities. So WASB as a service provides all of that support to the district.
Thank you.
As part of my process with looking at policy though, I also, if everyone can see, I have lots of papers here. What I do when I look at that is I go into the members only portal and I review all the policy samples. I look at our current policy, if there's one on the books. I look at neighboring policy, and I always scout a Neola policy as well, just for comparison before bringing anything forward. So we're still in tune with those pieces.
Any questions on that? Are you looking at me to carry us along through the agenda?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can
kick
as well.
it to me. So I don't hear anything anything different from the committee than what I'm accustomed to, that keeping policy lean in accordance with what we need it and making sure it's something accessible to the public and we're not kind of overwieldy with it.
Well, and I think you mentioned something very important with regard to our use of the subscription is that they're watching and they're monitoring.
Mhm.
So if we go beyond that, which in many cases may be very appropriate, we just need to keep in mind that that's on us then to monitor because
Correct.
that's custom. And so, you know, the idea of keeping it lean would seem to make sense. We may need to deviate from that for good reason, but I like that as a general guiding principle.
And I think another thing to highlight for our community, something that's really important to us, is that sense of local control. That while we get template language, we are the owners of that language, and we can make sure and customize, if you will, the language that we're putting into policy adoption. It comes through committee, it goes to the full board. There's opportunities for outreach for people to be interested in that. So I think that's an important element in that. Sometimes with other subscriptions, you kind of just adopt packages. So this is really giving us, as you said, an element of ownership and accountability.
What I also appreciate is that it calls for this committee to review these policies from time to time for that very reason. So it all comes full circle.
It does. There's plenty of work to be done in policy.
I know I get emails every now and then from WASB talking about legislative updates, and there could be times where the legislature says that you have to have a certain policy on non-discrimination or whatever.
Mhm.
And if we don't,
We have those tonight to talk about.
yeah, then we're technically not in compliance and need to get policy formulated. So, I guess that being said, can we leave that up to you as the superintendent to bring those to policy, saying, look, committee,
Yep.
this has been enacted by the legislature and it's time for us to put our local policy.
Yep, absolutely. So that's what we'll leave with tonight, is to kind of review all the ones that are needed, necessary. They're either required because of statute or they're recommended strongly by WASB. That's what I'll lead with today. And we'll work through that foundation, see how far we get, and then we set our cycle around that. So that is something I do. I create the draft language and then we bring it here for discussion to, again, personalize, localize. So with that said, if you want me to jump ahead
Yep,
to
go
that
ahead.
next one, I'd like us to take a minute and look at policy 151, which is the standing policy on how we formulate, adopt, and delete policies. I didn't find any flaws in the policy. It's not out of date. It gives opportunities. What it's doing, it's pushing to committee, then it's bringing to the full board for multiple cycles before adoption. That gives plenty of opportunity for input, to think about it. Sometimes just small keywords matter in policy, but it also has a fast track adoption option for us. Again, if we need something and it's compulsory or really, kind of mandated by the law, there's not a lot of, localization to it, that kind of thing, we have fast track options too. So this appears to be a process that has worked. Was there anything that the board wanted to kind of discuss or look about or talk about as being different?
I wouldn't have anything like that to bring up. One question I might have is this policy does discuss the use of administrative rules. Can you talk about that a little bit? I've always interpreted that as something that gives a little more local context or flavor to a policy.
So you have, so there's a couple parts to policy. So you have the policy itself, then you would have an accompanying, and you don't need to, you don't have to have any administrative rules. An administrative rule is more like the procedural manual of how we would execute it. So it might give you that. And then there might be exhibits. Maybe there's a specific form that goes with something, and that would be an exhibit. In this, it's saying that we have the authority to create an administrative rule to provide further detail to implement that policy. So as long as it's consistent with the policy, and it's just giving that kind of next layer of process or procedure, that would be considered binding. So there are quite a few administrative rules that are out of date that I will go through before removing. But that is something that at this point, I'm not going to remove any, even though I have the authority by this policy to renew those. I think that the purpose and intent in here was to make that fluid and flexible. So if something changed, Even though the policy is written for the overall statute, but something procedurally changes, we can go in and change that without it having to go through or be delayed by committee vote when it's staying in alignment.
Thank you.
Policy 151 outlines where a proposed policy, or I suppose a change to a current policy, can originate from. And it's from several sources, like a parent, a taxpayer, employee, and so forth. But then it goes on to talk about how the changes or the new policy should be submitted to the chairman of the policy committee, and that person will consult with the superintendent and shall introduce the proposal to the policy committee. From there, the board policy committee will review and possibly revise the policy proposals before presentation to the board, and will report the progress of its work to the board. What if the policy committee doesn't even want to bring it to the board? Is that clearly stated in here where a proposal could die in committee? At least that's the way I've understood it in the past, was that a proposal, if someone brings in a crazy off-the-wall policy, we will review it, because it says that we will do that.
The line saying, here's where we'd want to maybe have a nuance in that line. The chairman consults with the superintendent and shall introduce the proposal to the board policy committee for review. So it would have to come here minimally,
Yep.
but then it doesn't need to go forward. Because in here it says it's the committee's job to review and revise before you present it. It would never leave committee.
So it would be something like, the chairman will consult the superintendent, shall introduce the proposals to the policy committee for review and possible approval, or something of that sort.
And possible forwarding to the full board.
I think you have it in the next paragraph. So it's the committee's job to review, possibly revise before presenting anything to the board, right? So to me, it's almost the absence of saying, what Joel's saying is, yes, it could die there, but it's saying it's got to come from our committee to be presented to the board. So if it never leaves our committee, it's not going to the board. But if you want to be more clear about that and just let the public know, it is possible that the committee may or may not forward a policy to the board for review.
I see. I think your point is that earlier on, there is the requirement that the chairman consults the superintendent and shall introduce a proposal to the policy committee.
So I have to bring it here.
But there's no shall bring it to the board
Correct.
proposed term later on.
Right, so is it clear to the public that it might just come here? And that's what Joel's saying. So I don't read that as I have to take it forward, but there is an absence of it specifically saying this committee may or may not forward. And we could write a line to that effect and put it in.
In my time on the board, we've never had a policy originate from, someone other than, whether it's the superintendent, administration, or a WASB recommendation sort of thing. I just, in the rare circumstance or case that a taxpayer brings let's say a crazy off-the-wall policy that we will only serve Diet Coke during lunch. No milk, no water, only Diet Coke. Well, we will review that policy and probably choose not to forward it onto the board.
So I would say that I would work with that person first, and I would explain the policy 458 that's already standing. I would also explain the 700 series around school lunch nutrition, that as a federally subsidized program, I can't possibly. So sometimes when people bring it forward, there's other avenues, right?
Yeah.
They're wondering something, or maybe they're sparked for action because they want something, or they've been denied something, and it exists probably somewhere, right? If it's not in policy, maybe it's in the administrative manual, maybe it's in the handbook, maybe it's here, there, that kind of thing. Or I would have to show that it's out of alignment with existing policy.
I think the third paragraph, I'm with you. I think that
It
to
implies
me,
that.
it implies that not every policy is going to go to the full board. I just don't want a taxpayer saying that this committee is roadblocking something from going to the full board. Like, well, why don't you just send it to the board, let them vote on it. Well, this committee has the authority, in my opinion, for a policy proposal to die. without going to the board.
I think that makes some sense, because otherwise it really undermines the function of the committee in the first place. Why have this committee? You just take everything to the board.
Yep, good point.
So-
I think the other piece, to your point, is in the policy committee update, during the board meeting, we say, what did we talk about? Oh, you'll see before these, we also discussed this, that will be coming forward, so that it's transparent, that the
Yeah.
board's aware. I think that is part of
And
the report.
that says in here, I don't know exactly what paragraph, but we'll report on the work out of this committee. It's in there
Right.
somewhere. So, yeah, good point.
So, I mean, it's not being hidden.
Great. Let's move on.
There you go. So the policy on making policies looks good. Then you also have, in a separate item, a separate administrative rule. And this is setting your schedule, and it's talking about the archive and availability of records. And it does have some really nice and unique things around, here's how we're gonna talk about, we're gonna refer to the district, we're gonna use the word superintendent. You're gonna see a lot of language, and maybe in some of the sample language tonight, you'll see district administrator. That's the licensure. So it's giving good things around how we should name things to keep it really similar. And it's giving you a cycle, but it also gives you an out on your cycle. So it's giving you, the policy committee in collaboration with the superintendent, subject to board concurrence, will determine scheduling for policies submitted for consideration. So you have a little bit of a review schedule. I think you can, instead of saying that, it should just be that we would maintain an ongoing cycle of review, and it should be revisited and updated annually or as needed. And this is an administrative rule, so we can make that change to reflect that. I just don't think that this cycle is representative of where we are, and it's not flexible.
So this is something you're proposing some slight changes to, but again, this is your administrative rule.
This
so
is an administrative rule.
You can make that change and put it in there without even bringing that
Correct, but I
to the
just
committee.
feel it,
Yeah.
to bring it through.
So you don't want to delete it, you want to just make some changes.
Correct. And people are gonna laugh, but do we or don't we use an Oxford comma? That is not so stated in this, but as a style piece, in a series, do you use the comma before the and or not? That's what the Oxford comma is. And I see it,
I always have.
I always use the
I
Oxford comma.
see it both ways, so is there a standardization, because I would include that as well, because that is something I'm seeing discrepant in the different policies.
I see
And everyone, you're welcome, you just learned a new term.
I see discrepancies in corporate emails that I get and the emails I write, I always use it,
Either one is
but.
accurate, just so you know,
Yeah.
it's like spelling the word bus and busing, you can use two S's or one, friends, don't throw down.
2 spaces after a period or?
Oh, I can't give up two, you know, I
I
can't.
always do too,
I
but.
can't do, I'm not gonna do it, it makes my dissertation longer.
I like the Oxford comma, but
It's
Two
generally
different
how I
colors.
use it, just so as I look at standardization. Another piece we're gonna look at is we also subscribe to board docs. It's what houses your agendas, all these materials, so they're accessible to not just you, but our public, and ease of use. So they do have a portal in which you can load your board policies and search in there and pop down the different series and do that. So I'd like to start migrating them into that system. We would keep them in both places if people are accustomed to, because it'll take a while for us to load that. But I'd like to start using that system to its full functionality.
We don't have to pay more to do that?
No,
No, we already have it, and we've talked about it for a couple of years, and
Oh.
it just
We just
was
haven't used
a
it.
capacity issue, and as we review all of this stuff, now would be a great time to start the transition.
As long as we can update what's in board docs along with what's on our website so that there's
Yep.
never a discrepancy.
exactly.
Because that can't happen.
Yep,
right?
so I would coexist them for a little bit as we adopt the new ones, we load it into the new, and when we're ready to
Well, that
transition
sounds
over,
great.
we do
Yeah,
that.
the intent would be by the end of the calendar year to potentially be off of the website side of it and then into board docs so that we don't have to, if we switch website providers, we aren't constantly recreating all those hundreds of
Links
pages
and-
versus something like board docs is something we're not gonna change very often. There's very few softwares like that, so
Yeah.
we would stay
Efficient,
with it.
effective, and it's something we're paying for. Perfect. Any other questions or administrative rules or procedures around policy.
Very good.
Standards are good.
All right, for the fun part. If you go to item D, the recommendations for review or revision of required or recommended policies, there's a link there. I listed the policies, but there's a link, and I'd like to work from the second tab, which is laid out, and it's called required and recommended. So I have the master list of all policies. That's what you would see on our website. They're linked. But WASB does a couple things for us. Again, that's that policy subscription service. So they provide every single policy in a series. All policies are in the 100 series, board operations, the 200 series, administration, 300 series, instruction. They all have a big bucket series, and they give you all these policies that are available, that they've got maybe templates on, or this is the coding that we would use. So these numbers, you can tell any district who uses that, all of our codes, our numbers are gonna be consistent. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for this guide. So first I always, and I've put that in there too, you know, is there a policy that we would like to explore and look at? So there's a couple that I wanted to lead with that I don't find us having, that are recommended to have.
Do our current policies align? Is WASB's policy 130, is that organization of the school board? Like, do
No.
our current policies align, the number-wise, align with theirs?
Not all of them, no.
They don't, but they should.
Right, they should, and I called that out in some spots, and that
Okay.
can be an easy, content stays the same, but we're gonna change the heading
Yeah,
fix
got it.
for those ones, and there's a couple that we really need that I call out and say, like, this needs attention now,
Got it, yep,
okay?
thanks.
So let me just orient you to this second tab in this spreadsheet. It's called required recommended. So WASB first gives us this list of all kind of the numbers and what's out there. They're also part of our service. They're gonna tell me, these are the ones you need, right? They have a fancy double check mark, like these are mandated, you need those. Well, a single check mark is it's recommended. So I scoured through all of our policies. You can see my notes where I found the language or the pieces or where I didn't find things to make sure that we had what we needed to. Okay, so you'll see on that spreadsheet, mandated means there's a state statute, something that's requiring us to have it. Recommended means there's a law, a rule, or an expert opinion like WASB, our policy service, saying you should consider having this on the books somewhere. Okay? I have a last action date, and then I have, after my review, what my recommendations are. So this sheet is distilling all of our policies down just to all the ones that are recommended or required. Okay, so, and that's still a pretty big list for us to be looking at. Any questions about this and how I've set the priority to look at those?
So there will be some, I think I see it on the sheet.
Yep.
Where it's a policy that's neither mandated nor necessarily recommended. So,
But there's something in it that I say we need to address.
okay.
So if you look at,
What line are you looking at?
For instance, 19, like,
19?
19, 14 would be the same.
Got it.
it's in conflict with something. So there's one that says we're supposed to have a non-voting member of the high school on our board. So I put that one on here. It's not required, it's not mandated, but I'm out of compliance with it, so we need to talk about it.
Sure, because our policy says we should have it, and we don't, so
Correct.
we're out of alignment
Correct.
with our own policy.
So even though it's not checked, there's a reason that I put it on this sheet.
Sure.
So good catch, there's a couple of those.
There are two board reps that give us updates, don't meet that stipulation.
Well, we'll get to that.
Maybe.
If you want to take it in order, it says they're elected. So there isn't oversight on an election or anything like that. So we would have to revisit that. So we do have students involved. We do highlight student programs, but, so we can get to that one.
Okay.
All right, with that said, shall we dig in?
Let's dig in.
All right.
We waited long enough.
The first one that you see, and again, for public and for you out there, if you're going to that spreadsheet, it is linked. You'll see under the school side, the PDF link, 113 is not linked because this does not exist for us. Non-discrimination in district programs, activities, and operations is a mandated policy. What I've given you is the WASB sample language, and I even gave like the notes from WASB in it to really help us have a discussion on specifically Title IX complaints is the part that came into law and that is creating this shift in practice. And it also touches, you'll see in my spreadsheet, I'll make a reference to this policy quite a few times, especially in the employee section, because this one, what we do with this one, is interconnected to a whole bunch of other ones. So I also call that out and say, well, when we get through this one. So this is non-discrimination. We're bound to have non-discrimination statements, those pieces. What it is doing is really specifically calling out Title IX, and then it talks about how are you going to determine who's in charge of overseeing this. So I would name myself as the, in our language we use superintendent, you'll see I think still district administrator. Make that as the authority, and then I would probably name HR as second on that in taking those complaints. But we have to call out, you know, who's the coordinator of this? How do you make a complaint for it? What's our action on that? What do we need to do? So this is the WASB template language and a couple of those decision points. You should know that this, all of us, there's, I believe 8 of us, had to go through intensive Title IX training over the summer so that we cleared, it's not just mandatory that you update the policy, but we had to all be trained in the grievance process. We had to be completing the mandatory role-based training for all designated coordinators and investigators and decision makers. So we've all done that piece as well. And then we need to take care of the policy piece. So there was a lot of work around Title IX through the summer and fall. Are there any questions on the why behind this?
This looks similar to a policy that we had evaluated as a board, I don't know, within the last year and a half. Okay, you're
They're
not
very connected, so you'll see
Okay.
me reference quite a few of them. So what we do with this one, we can do some generalizations and you have to align them to the other. Because we have complaint procedures, we have discrimination statements embedded in a lot of things, we have all of those in a lot of places. So then, this one, while mandated, then what we do with this one is going to impact what we do with the others and how we look for alignment. Because you want it to be easy for people, right? If someone needs to make a complaint, like, where do I find that?
Mhm.
How do I know what it is and what's the process? That's what they want to know. And at least it's giving them, it would say, like, you contact the superintendent and they will help you navigate that process. You can have multiple people to be the primary contact. That's not something that I would recommend. I would recommend you have one primary contact to take the complaints and then dispatch how those are investigated and responsible for follow-up. Unless that's something the committee feels otherwise on. I would not recommend multiple people taking in the complaints. There are multiple people as coordinators, investigators, and all of those pieces.
I've never seen a policy that specifically outlines, I mean, this policy wants a person's name.
Yes,
I mean, a lot of times we'll refer to the superintendent or director of technology or director of facilities. This one's requiring a name, a title, a physical address, a phone number. I've never seen that before.
well, and if you look, it's the position title and the address, that's all the same. And we can use our district issued email address to go in as that, but no, you want it that easy, and you want it very clear for people, and you want those to go to the right person immediately. Because what if something got lost somewhere and they didn't know what to do with it, and then you're wasting time on serious matters.
How much editing do you think needs to be done to this policy before we start making it West Bend policy? Is it pretty good the way it is? I mean, this is a long one that's got a
It's-
whole page and a half of legal references to it.
It's hugely long, and not too many people have come out of the gate with this one in its entirety yet. So this is what they're recommending. I'd like to see a couple, I've made some calls to some other districts to see, because I like to tighten it where I can. But it's so chunked out and if this, then this, it's pretty straightforward for people, for users. You know, if you think this, then this is what you do and here's who you contact. So what I can do is do some more investigation. I think there's a lot of people still, so while this is mandated, all the procedural pieces, you have a little time to implement. We have some time in between our next meeting to do a little bit more investigative work and
And it's long, but
it's required.
it's
Yeah.
required.
It's required for a reason.
Well, and back to my earlier statement, my guess is this is an area of the law that evolves constantly and somewhat quickly. And so the idea of using something that is more standard, because then we have that monitoring capability for WASB, it would seem to make sense. But admittedly, I have to dig into it here a little bit, because we shouldn't be afraid of it just because it's long, but we should be sure that everything that's in there is something that,
Necessary and user-friendly.
correct, yes.
Right? Our audience
Yes.
is the public, so that's what we're reading for as well.
Yes.
So I'm gonna mark this one as, we'll bring that back for discussion. I'm going to gather if anyone's implemented, pared that down. I can call WASB again, because part of our service, and just say, hey, we're looking at this, we're trying to hone it. What else could we get rid of? How could we condense these? So that we're driving people to kind of one process, one piece, and naming all that in there. Because you can put, you know, this person is in charge of this complaint and this kind of complaint and that one. You can spell all those out and maybe we can, yes, it's long, but maybe we can collapse a lot of other pieces under this umbrella. And I've got those so marked
Sure.
on this spreadsheet. So why don't I do that work for the committee in between?
I don't know that much is gonna change. These are all state laws. I mean, we aren't gonna be able to,
I think what we get is being able to fold some of those other ones under here.
okay?
So it's worthy of looking at that to make sure we have to look at them to make sure they're aligned, if you don't want anything competing, and you don't want people getting frustrated, like, well, I don't know, is it this or is it that? You want something to be easy for the public.
All right, so
All right.
we'll let you work on that one and bring it back.
Yep, and you'll share your ideas and feedback, and we'll go from there. In that next one, it's filling school board member vacancies. So this had been a while since it was touched. It was interesting. We also have 134 as a separate policy around military service. So I wasn't sure if we want to keep, that's a temporary board vacancy due to military service. I didn't prioritize that one. Its language seemed good. What we do need on the books is something for filling board member vacancies. I thought the language with the WASB, when I click on it, it really clearly stated like the steps that were going to be followed. So I don't know in comparison between the language that you had from 2017 and this WASB language. This is giving timelines, and this is. I don't know if you recall, there were some issues in other districts where, you know, they were having issues filling vacancies and timelines and things like that. So it was setting forward a little bit, I think, cleaner steps and process of how you would do that, down to, is that a roll call vote, is it a secret ballot, how are you gonna handle that? And that happens, people could move, you know, what is the process that we're going to follow for that?
Yeah, I like the step-by-step guidance. I thought that was good, and it drives doubt and it makes it more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Is this one where you would get rid of the AR? Isn't there an AR for this one? Yeah, there is.
So I don't believe that you need the AR because the steps are so clearly stated in,
The AR talks about the notice of the vacancy, the
Right.
declaration of interest, deadline for filing interviews, but the new policy would outline,
That should just be in policy. That's, to me, that's the executive functioning of the board, and it should be clearly stated, and it should help you know, so you're not having to determine that as a board if you were faced with a vacancy. Nope, this is literally what we do, down to, yep, do I roll call that vote? Do I secret ballot it?
Yep.
How do I do it?
Mhm.
What needs to get done? What's the timeline? It's all there for you, and it's alignment with statutes.
I like the WASB policy,
I do too.
and get rid of the, well, up to you, but.
You would, yep,
I
so
would
we
get
would
rid of the
revise,
AR.
yep, we would revise out, get rid of all our old language, dump the AR, and replace all of it with this one. Okay?
It's good.
Yeah, I thought it was very clear,
Mhm.
you know, if you were someone interested in an interim vacancy at the board, I thought it was really clear on, oh, this is how they're gonna do it.
Mhm.
And that's, I know that's what we strive for, is just transparency with our public and ease of use, so. The next one is under the administrative category, and it's administrative staff evaluations. So we had 225.1 on the books. It does not follow the current evaluation system, so we use the educator effectiveness system. It didn't lay out some things, and it did not speak to the evaluation of the superintendent. So that's also a job, so the only nuance is that it's your job to do the evaluation of the superintendent. And then it's my job to make sure we have an evaluation process for everyone else. And it's our job to, it's my job to make sure and evaluate the administrators or a designee. In this case, I evaluate our administrators. So the additions in this are the language around the superintendent's evaluation and your responsibility. It's in lines 9 through 12.
The current policy talks about administrative staff should be evaluated annually.
Correct. So they're evaluated annually for the first 3 years. Then you go through these other processes, but their formal evaluation is once every 3 years. So they would do 3-time check-in, observations, all these things in their off year, but that formal is every 3rd year. And that's part of the state process that we've adopted.
It's probably part of our administrative handbook too,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, so it's out of alignment,
Yeah.
our current policy with practice. And like I said, I thought it was important to put something in around the superintendent evaluation as well. So that was in policy somewhere.
Great.
So that's 225.1. I mean, as long as it's in alignment with our
Yes.
administrator handbook, whatever.
It gives you the nuance to, where, so even though you would expect that if there's performance or for whatever reason, you know, let's say last year, again, you were caught with COVID and, you know, other things became a priority, maybe they deferred some, it gives you wiggle room to put people on evaluation again or shift up those years. It gives you flexibility where you need it.
Mhm.
So is that okay that those are blended as well? You can have a standalone policy on the superintendent and one for administrative, or you can keep it commingled like this. It's whatever the committee would like, because I can bring you a standalone superintendent one as well.
I don't know, I like it being combined.
Mhm.
It's also a little bit simpler for maintenance and upkeep
Yeah.
to just have one.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay.
The next series, we've been doing really good on curriculum and instruction. So a lot of those, the first one that you see is standards aligned, goal-based curriculum development. You can see the last action date. I still reviewed all of those to make sure it was up to date with most recent templates, most recent language. I still did that work. So that's me saying, not just looking at the date of 2019, but it's also saying not applicable right now because we're trying to prioritize. This one is up to date and fine. 333, that's an interesting one. I highlighted the changes. This is our current language. If you click on that, revisions are highlighted in yellow. It adds the word student privacy to the title, which is the actual title with WASB of the coding and the policy. So it adds that. There was some missing punctuation, and I formatted it appropriately. So it's not changing content, but I thought the fixing of this title was important to add that student privacy, especially if people were searching. It covers things like surveys, all of that. So again, content is the same, but I was cleaning up title and format.
So is the idea that student privacy is nested in this policy is because it's really linked closely with parental rights? Is that?
Yeah, they have that. You can do, in this one, you could, this is 333. You can do student surveys separately, but I think it's getting at that information and disclosure that those are student rights as well. And then anyone under 18, it's a parent's responsibility to manage and protect the rights of their child. So I think that's why they get commingled, that there's inherently some student rights, but it's the parents' rights and responsibilities to manage that.
Well, that one was pretty easy update.
Yeah.
Not much.
Yeah, I just want to add those words and some
Into
punctuation.
a title, and I think there's a colon in line 32.
Yeah.
Fast check.
Yeah.
And again, the only nuance there is if you wanted me to break out the student survey section into its own policy, that could become 333.1.
It's in here. I mean, line 3, I think, starts
It
talking about.
it goes through it.
I'm fine with leaving it in here.
Okay.
I'm
Did
too.
you hear what Paul said on this one? Probably could be fast tracked. It's not changing the
Yep.
policy really at all. It's just a clarification on the title. And
And formatting.
so
Yep.
if you want to bring that one to our next
Perfect.
board meeting, we can do that.
Okay. The next is the AR. I think it should have a name change. It's mimicking, it's just saying the policy name that was used, but when you look at this AR, it's clearly about notification for families around human growth and development. And if I were a parent looking for that information, I would never find it with this. Yes, it's in student handbooks and it's repeated there as well, and maybe, not a lot of people go to policy to look for things, they go more to their student handbooks. But if we keep this here, I think it's important, but I would change the name so it more clearly states what it is.
What do you want to change it?
I would just
Human
look
growth
at
and development.
notification for families.
And include HGD in the title?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, human growth and development, plan for communication
Right.
and notification to families, or,
I
plan
like
for
it.
notification to families.
No?
Because that way, if maybe they missed it in the handbook, or maybe they don't have kids in school, so they don't go to the handbook, they're looking for it outside of that would be helpful. So I just think it needs clarity in its name.
This is the AR we're talking
Correct, it's an AR, you don't need it necessarily, but I think it's an important topic for families and the community, and I think it should be a little bit more accessible.
Yeah. Make it easier to find.
Yeah,
Good.
is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. The next one, 342.1, instruction, students with disabilities, no need to update. In fact, the next several, gifted and talented, as well as the AR, which was aligned to the policy, the Title I programming, the EL, English Language Learner Service, all of the rest of those in there were updated. The other ones I'm good with. I don't know why this isn't marked, but the Start College Now program was updated as well. Sorry, I will add that. So under our instructional arrangements, part-time open enrollment, Start College Now, early college credit programs were all recently updated. They're all up to date as well. Any questions on those two buckets? Okay. The next one's around academic achievement. There's a policy around 345.1. It's listed as grade point, and that is 345.1 is actually grading systems. So it's bigger than grade point. So while the information I found to be accurate, I feel that this needs to go back to not only teaching and learning, but the administrative team, and we should be looking at a comprehensive policy around our grading systems and philosophy. So it's not inherently, nothing's wrong with it, but it's mislabeled and should be expanded to include our philosophy and practice around grading in general, not just grade point calculations.
Do you talk about class rank in a policy?
That would be 345.11, if you would like that.
I thought we had a reference to class rank somewhere, but maybe I'm wrong.
Was that,
It may have gone away. Most are getting rid of rank because rank is the context of where you go to school. So I could be top 10 at West Bend and it means one thing, and I could be top 10 at, some,
How about like
Charter or
also
something like that.
determining who's our or valedictorian, salutatorian, that sort of thing? Is that something that's typically in policy?
you could go either way on those.
I thought we had that somewhere, but maybe they would be right here in one of these policies, and it doesn't.
Yeah,
look
I
like
can go to
they
the
are,
master
so-
list and look for it.
Jeff,
unless-
it's there. You were right, 34511 exists. It lists all that. We actually brought it to
Yeah.
policy not too long ago.
So it's not one that's required, so if you
Can you say
go,
what number again?
34511, it'll be on that master tab on the
Yep.
spreadsheet.
Yeah. Grade point average, 345.1.
class rankings, 345.11.
345.11.
what was the,
You just saw it in February 2020.
Yep.
I don't have a 345.1.
Go to your master list. the
I'm
first
on
one.
it.
Just click it.
I gotta go up here.
I'm literally on it.
Oh, there it is down there.
There.
I was looking up here.
I don't know why it's on there.
Got it.
So it's class ranking. So you have that.
Is that something we want to keep? Not to jump off
I-
topic here, but is that typical?
No, I will tell you that, so I've been doing grading for a lot of years of my career, comprehensive grading reform. And I think here we've only scratched the surface of that, and we have bits and pieces everywhere. As part of the reform work that I've done in the past, we visited every college in the UW system, technical schools, as well as those with reciprocity area, because we wanted to make sure that our practices, the district I was in at the time, positioned our students to walk through any door that they wanted to for their future. So we aligned it that way. Again, with class rankings, they're around the context. A lot of them went to, you see some very progressive grading practices that go to a cum laude system, more like a university that's, not kind of rank and file. Because again, the context of, I'm number 25 here, and what does it mean to be 25 over there? Universities will tell you they know the rigor of our programs, and they look less at that. They look at, did our students take rigorous coursework? Were they taking AP classes? Were they participating in extracurriculars? Were they doing those kinds of things? They would rather, when we had done our interviews with admissions counselors back in the day, they would rather see kids taking really rigorous classes like AP classes and getting a C than taking the easy way and getting an A in it. So they really don't utilize that the way that I think but it was probably utilized when we were growing up and kind of the game we're used to playing. So I think those, when we look at kicking the rock over on, we have to look deeper than just grade point average. We have to look at grading as a whole. That all needs to come as part of that package, so it's not sitting out all over.
I agree with you. 345.1 is more than just grade point average, it's grading as a whole. I don't see the point of having a separate 345.11 class ranking policy.
I don't either.
If you want to include that in 345.1, then do it. But I don't know, I wondered that a year ago, I guess, when we were looking at both of these, why we had two separate ones.
You don't need them, you just need 345.1, which is actually called grading systems, and you would fold that all in.
is that where you would define, I'm trying to think of the topic that we had in the last year with the new grading approach where, you know, K4, 6 perhaps, but then you gotta stay kind of the traditional model at the high school level
Mhm.
because that matriculates into
Correct.
higher ed.
Yep, you would clearly define that, and the purpose, the philosophy, and then you would reference where that's accessible and how we really use it.
What's that alternative model called?
Grading for learning, probably.
Yeah, is that what?
Grading for learning.
Okay.
So you're gonna use terms like emerging, proficient, those kinds of
Yes.
things
Oh,
with
yes,
your
yes.
younger learners.
1s, 2s, 3s,
Yep.
and 4s, and
And then you're gonna roll, and all you're doing is you're always looking for a student to be proficient. And then each kind of trimester, quarter, semester, you're raising that bar. So it's not like, oh, I start out emerging and I'm gonna get proficient by the end of the year. That's wrong. I'm always proficient as a student, but my teachers keep upping the bar and changing my goals, and I'm always gonna be proficient. So you're always shooting for proficient. And that's when they're helping kind of set goals with kids. So it's a shift in thinking about, you know, you can go up to little kids, and those are some of the greatest conversations, you know, with a first grader, like, oh, I'm a reader, and my stretch goal is this, and I'm gonna work on this part, and here's how I'm gonna do it, and here's how my teacher's gonna help me. You know, they really are thinking about themselves as learners, versus if you walk into what sets apart classrooms, if you walk into a classroom and you ask a student what they're doing, and they tell you, I'm doing this worksheet, or I'm doing this, versus they're telling you and framing it of, oh, we're learning about this, or I'm working on this goal, that's a huge shift that is kind of a foundational piece of those conversations. Because you want kids to be doing that and not just tasks. So this needs a little bit of work. And our teachers feel that too. They need some clarity around the philosophy and how to execute it in our system, which is Skyward. You know, so, okay, if I'm doing this, then how do I do that? There's been some changes in the grade book where people think like, oh, I can just change this one category heading or this, and it's like that sets off a whole ripple into a system that's really hard to recover from. So I think that especially our elementary friends are like, please kick over the rock and help us get to, because part of grading then is the reporting part and what the report cards look like. So I think there's a collective cheer for, please take this forward. So that's a little bit heavier lift. There's nothing in there that's harming us in any way right now, but.
so that one you'll take time with your administrative team, it says, and come back and
Correct.
potentially combine some other,
Yep.
like
I would-
345.11
Yep.
or whatever, and come back
And I would work with teacher leaders as well who are interested in that and really talk about it as a system.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And would you see grading systems as a singular policy for the district, or would you have subordinate pieces for different tiers, K4, intermediate, et cetera?
You would reference them in the policy, and you give yourself the flexibility of how they would be articulated. So there'll be a grading plan, and you know, and you would say philosophically, in these, we're gonna focus on this, and here's the language we use, that kind of thing. You write it flexible enough, so it's all one, it's not multiple competing. And then, as the AR, or just as a piece of procedure, it would be like, oh, here's what that looks like on the report card. There's some connections for people, because again, the reality is, if you have a child in school, you're not coming to policy to figure out how to understand the report card. That's just a foundational piece to help us set up some other pieces for kids and for families to understand their report card and grades and how they come to be. Because, you know, we all get that, you gave me this, well, let's talk about this. The promotion, placement, retention, and graduation requirements, those were recently revisited and solid, as well as our district testing program and the alignment of the opt-out for some certain pieces. We are preparing ourselves for testing. You've seen the assessment, the curriculum committee talked about the assessment cycle for this year. While they were paused last year, they will be doing standardized testing at the state level, so we're preparing for that now. One thing that we are not going to prepare for mindfully is to deploy an electronic ACT. We'll communicate with our families on that. We don't believe that the state is ready to support the thousands of kids, so we'll stick with paper for right now. But other than that, these policies talk about our different testing options. But know that testing will be back this year at the state level, and then there's local assessments that we have as well. So those were all up to date. Looking at privacy of records, educational rights, maybe this is what was sparking your memory, Chris, of some of those rights pieces.
Mhm.
So this is records, this is, if you've got kids in school, everyone gets the data directory form and all those releases of information, those things, these are up to date. The AR is still reflective. We do a lot of it online, which is easier access for our families. Instructional materials, again, that's one that's recently been up to date, as well as its guidelines for selection. There is on the books, I brought it with me, and Tim will, it's 6181.2. It's still technically on the books. You can tell it's way off because it doesn't follow any system of coding. And it's called AV Preview and Purchase Process. And it's from '04. We do not need this. I would recommend immediate removal. It's not even lined up. It's coded as 361.1 AR. I think it could be sitting in the books as an old policy. So instead of me just removing it as an AR, I would move that we formally remove it, just in case it's been sitting out there as a dormant policy. That way we've got it covered. Because I don't trust this number sitting here not being an old policy. Does that make sense?
The content that it addresses is included in some other existing policy, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's around buying videotapes and DVDs.
Where do you do that now, other than taking a video?
I've come places,
Tim's
Paul,
like-
still looking.
I go, Tim, what, he's like, what? And so,
Yeah,
like
I'll be
I
honest
said,
with you, going through policies, I missed the AR because I didn't realize it was even tied to that at one point.
but I don't know or trust that this wasn't sitting here dormant with this number here, so I think we just formally remove it, so then it's off the books.
Just repeal the whole thing.
Correct. Does that make sense to everyone? That's the why. Otherwise, the AR would just sunset and say it's not even connected, but with that weird number sitting on it, we think it might be a lingering policy that, and I don't wanna go through
That's
years of
weird.
policy work to figure out if
So
they
you say
actually
legal business,
sunset it.
for the avoidance of doubt.
Exactly,
You
let's
won't-
just get rid of
You'll
it
get rid of it.
formally.
Yep.
So the 361.1 AR that's in there now looks,
Is this,
well, there's another one here.
Yeah,
Evaluation of the
yeah.
instructional program.
yep, it's 361.1 AR.
But it's the 2017 one, is that
Guidelines for
okay?
selection
Yes, the
instructions.
2017 is okay and up to date.
The one underneath.
But the
is-
one underneath that has 6181.2
Yeah,
rule AV program, like,
I see that.
that is bad.
So how are you gonna bring that to the board?
So I would bring it as policy 6181.2 and bring it for removal.
Which we should say probably, which may or may not exist, but for the avoidance of doubt.
Right,
If such thing exists, we're gonna repeal it.
right, we're gonna give it a clean ending,
Got it.
so to speak.
Got it, sounds good.
361.2, when you look at our coding, 361.2 is library material selection. It's not reproducing copyrighted material at all.
So is this just incorrectly numbered?
So, and Tim can weigh in on this, because the reproducing of copyrighted material is embedded in, I think, a teacher one.
So what's weird is this 361.2 talks about reproducing copyrighted material. However, it's really geared towards staff. So 300 is that student instructional materials piece. And it
That's a
probably-
500
It
series.
should go to 500, because it's larger than instructional materials. This could be athletics, this could be co-curriculars. It should be the rule that we abide by in my office and in Jen's office. So the idea being it should go into the 500s as a staff piece, and not just about instructional materials that I might copy a textbook and that's breaking copyright.
Right, and so then the piece is around 361.2 being library material selection, is what it really is. And that, you know, Tim, do you feel in instructional material selection that's covered enough for your satisfaction?
I
Because I
think
really,
I think we're okay now.
Yeah.
I think just looking through, I think to Paul's question about the content in the old AV one, we're gonna have to revisit the instructional material selection AR anyways, because there's old language of positions and some
Mhm.
other processes, so that's when we would review that. If we determine at that point the AR can't suffice, then we would have to have a separate policy. But I
So-
think we can add that into the AR to get what we want.
so then what I would say is we sunset this 361.2, which isn't even correct. We'll make sure he has adequate in the AR around selection of materials in relation to libraries. We have a process around contested books, we have a process around all those materials. Anything in our libraries could be deemed instructional resources for our students, so we can cross-reference that piece. And then, really, you know, you can push some pieces in around copyrighted materials, but I question if that's necessary. Tim, would you like to see that for staff?
I guess the question I go to is why do we recreate a policy when it's literally
It's the law.
law?
And
So
it's
if
in
I don't
our-
have to write one and we just reference the law in this case, we're gonna do nothing different here than what the law says in this case. So if we just reference the law to it, I don't know the need to have the individual policy.
So to me, this would be part of your onboarding of all staff every year. There's certain things, there's certain policies that they have to annually review, and there's certain practices that they have to annually review, like we're mandatory reporters, we need to go through that. I think pushing that into that module where every employee does the, like, oh, this is what copyright means, and here's what I need to do, and then they sign off on that, I think that meets it.
So
I don't
this,
think we need a copyright piece anymore.
yeah. So the posture of this one is employee focused. Do we have something that addresses copyright / plagiarism on the student side?
Your technology policy and acceptable use
If there's
gets at
something
student
acceptable
use of technology.
But then each one of your schools' student handbooks will also reference academic integrity, so cheating and all of those different types of pieces.
And again, federal laws around
Mhm.
copyright licensure and so
Yep.
forth, okay?
Mhm. So we think it's stated in other places, we'll do the crosswalk of the 1AR, but get it off the books.
Agreed.
Good.
The next one is interlibrary loan resource sharing. This is just the WASB template language. I had Tim look at that to just bring it up to date. It's just showing that our library media centers, that we do interlibrary loaning to ourselves, and we might do it with other schools, other agencies. We would keep our kids as a priority. We wouldn't take out of circulation anything that's, you know, the new hot read, we're not giving away. But we're good partners, and we make sure that our kids have access, and we know that not one collection can do it all. So no different than your current library cards, where we can access materials at different libraries too.
So this one would be potentially bringing to the board, if you all think it's good to go. It looks,
It would continue our current practices, so we have a phenomenal partnership with our public library here to interlibrary loan. Typically, we're loaning more from them than we may loan to them at that point, but we do a lot of loaning back and forth internally to our libraries for our students, especially that high school to an 8th grade, that that Badger to a 6th grade type of thing, we often see, so.
looks good to me.
Me too.
Move it along.
The next couple, student acceptable use, those pieces that we just referenced, those are, recently updated. Some of my first board meetings that I came to. I remember there was a policy from 1972.
Dust off that one.
I'm like, I think Bill was one of his lineup in 1982, so I was feeling pretty good. The next one is technology planning for students with special needs. It's not the correct number. 363.3 is the appropriate number. It should be brought forward with a number correction. Tim reviewed it. You said it's old, but there's nothing.
There's not a lot in it that isn't in practice already.
Right.
So is the 363.3 right above it then numbered wrong too?
I was asking that same question.
363 as a whole is correct.
So,
Oh, hang on, your
Line 49.
assistive technology?
yeah, it's so, right, as Paul was saying, line 49 on the spreadsheet has a 363.3.
Yes, Tim, you numbered yours wrong. No, look at it. Jen might have transferred it over. It's 363.2 it's on the spreadsheet that we have it wrong.
This is one of those weird ones where WASB gives you the opportunity to have the second policy, which is the
Let me just-
access to network information resources. We believe at this time we should carry both policies. It will be how we choose to number that correctly. So it comes in as 363.2 for both because they're really tied. We keep them separate for purposeful reasons at this point, but there may be a day in the future where they get combined into a lengthier policy.
Okay, so we take one WASB policy and split it into two, which requires two
So
reference
WASB
numbers.
actually provides you both in this case,
Oh.
which is kind of weird. So they say you have to have 363.2, which is that first one on there that you see about student acceptable use. That's our internet safety, COPA, all those types of things. They also say there's this alternative policy that you can run, but they don't give you a number suggested to align it with. Past practice over years in the district, when we looked at this, was they just went up the next number, was 363.3, which then I think is how it's.
Yeah, I'm gonna recommend we
the
change that
students
one.
with special needs became 363.4.
Yeah, that's wrong.
And I looked at that way before I was here, when I went back and looked for this
Was
meeting, I was
technically
like,
not a more
I'm
than.
like, yeah, it's not.
So do you want to have two
So,
363.2?
nope, absolutely not. You do not want to do that. So,
I think we gotta come up with a
here's what we're
number.
gonna do, 363.2, 363.21. Which would give us that, and then the 363.3, which is the correct number for technology planning for students with special needs.
So is that 2.1, is that 0.2.1 or 0.21 like 21?
0.21. Do you want it in parentheses? There's no, it would run out a second number is the convention. It would go to the second
So it's
number.
like that, it's like decimal.
So you
equivalent.
see, yeah, you'll see a couple others that we've got run out to a second number. They're very few, but
Yeah, so
They
you
do
could only
exist.
really have 9 major policies. And then when you hit 11, that's a qualifier to 0.1. Okay.
you would.
Until we need an 11th.
Well,
And I'm saying it's overkill on policy right now.
We're about to get into exhibits A, B, and C, so.
Don't get me started on all these
Yeah.
exhibits.
Well, Paul, you asked a good question, because I just pulled
Yeah.
up on our website, like under series 300, 345 academic achievement, we have 345.1, 0.3, 0.4,
345.61, there's a couple with,
66, then it's 345.11, then it's 345.61, so it looks like it's putting it into
It's-
numerical order,
yeah.
so we're gonna have to,
figure that out.
we're gonna figure that out. That's a good point.
Yeah,
It's good times,
yeah.
inheriting a lot of hands in a pot.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's
That's
okay.
a second decimal point, but I don't know if that applies with WASB's strategy or not, so.
We're gonna ask and talk about, and those are, when we do those kinds of cleanups, so there's another cleanup. So like when we update the non-discrimination statement, that's gonna be present in multiple policies. So I always keep a track of where that exists. So then when we're coming forward and we're gonna update this one thing, as part of that package, all these come. So when I say we're gonna update this to be this convention, that means these 8 get renamed or renumbered. but the content's all the same, then we can fast track those and fix it.
Well, in my opinion, this 363 situation can be fast tracked once you figure out what you want to number them and do.
Okay,
So,
and then we'll go through the others and just make sure that they hold to that same convention, all the ones that have the double numbers.
sure.
Right.
That way we're ensuring consistency. Counseling programs. So Sharon and I worked on this one, the last time this was touched in 2013. This is WASB template language, and it's taking into account school guidance and counseling, the academic career planning that's been put into place, and some of those pieces. So it's highlighting our support for students' mental and physical health.
This policy we've had since 1972, and it was last looked at in 2013. But if you ask me, it doesn't look like much has changed over the years.
The academic career planning is probably the newest language in it.
And some non-discrimination language too.
Correct.
So,
And there's certain policies where, I can remember in my past role, each district finds themselves reviewing policy in an ongoing manner, and we were also WASB subscribers, and we tried to, do we have to post that everywhere? Because then, if that changes, we have to go back and touch all these policies, and they're like, yep, there's certain ones that has to be in there. Okay.
Yeah, to Tim's point of, cascading and inheritance, if it's a federal law, it's in this higher level policy, it just all,
Right. Our joke in my last district was if we could write one policy that said each year we'll pinky swear not to break the law, we would just call it, but, right. But alas, they don't let you just do that.
so revisions look good to me to bring to the board. Agree? Okay.
Co-curricular activities, that's brought up to date. But then I looked at the AR, I don't find it necessary. If you take a look at that, is there any ideas that you want to be held to and push those right into the policy? Otherwise, I didn't really see a need for it.
So this policy, or the AR anyway, does start referring to some of the exhibits that follow as it relates to an application process.
Yeah, I didn't find it necessary, you can just put the exhibits in.
and that's what we did, because we didn't look at this, because we wouldn't look at the AR as part of the formal
Yeah.
board meeting.
So I would just sunset that and keep the exhibits. They're up to date, they looked fine. It was just, why do we need this AR, which just seemed to be an introduction to there's some
To the
exhibits here.
Exhibits, yeah.
Okay,
You're right, Paul, we probably,
June of 2020.
yeah, it just
I
wasn't,
remember what
I
I
just don't think it was touched then. So I'm gonna remove the exhibits, I'll stay, they were good. There is a.
so quick,
Go ahead.
quick question. I remember when we did this, do we want to keep them as exhibits A, B, C, or do you go 370.1, .2,
That's
.3?
generally how exhibits are numbered.
They are.
Yep. Mhm. You're referencing the
I mean,
labeled.
do most school districts have exhibits and policies like this?
Yes and no, it depends on philosophy.
It doesn't matter.
No,
You don't care, I
No.
guess is what I'm asking.
no,
Okay.
no, because it's just an exhibit, and if we change it, we will.
Okay, no problem.
So, yeah, no, I found them to be up to date and fine.
But an exhibit is a board policy.
Correct,
It's not an AR.
correct. So
So
you're saying
change
this
has
is your
to come back.
process?
Changes have to come back through committee to full board.
Correct. But they were around, if you look at them, they were around developing a club
Right.
and a co-curricular. And I thought that, there's probably significant history here around the why it's coming to the board and the importance of that, and feeling like there was an avenue for, most of them are gonna be driven by kids who wanna do something, so that there's a real process for them to follow, and not just, oh, yes or no, a one-off at the school kind of thing. So,
There is a history, it's probably been 10 years, but it
Yeah.
Gonna save us three.
So, no, I don't have any, I thought the process was fine,
Okay.
and the timelines were sound in it. I wanna just jump us down to 377 for a second. I wanna send a full review to this, it's old, to our middle and high school athletic directors. And then, do we want to blend anything around the nuances between interscholastics and intrascholastics and all of those pieces? Because, you know, one is sports against other schools and one is the sports programs we developed internally, and those pieces. So I can certainly take back the co-curricular, because that's got the intra-scholastic reference in it. And either we can push it all in something around athletics or leave it where it sits. I think I would look towards the actual athletic directors at middle and high school to determine if they've got a recommendation.
Sorry, and this is in the exhibits, like 370B and C?
So this is 377, you have philosophy and objectives for interscholastic athletics.
All right, thank you.
So, but there's, like I said, there's intrascholastic and there's interscholastic, and there's a reference around intra and the other, so how do we want to still state it? Neither is wrong, they're both up to date. I just think that the athletic directors at the middle and high school should review it. It's been a while, clearly. So I'm gonna kick that back to them to do review and recommendation, and I'll help lead them through that.
Okay.
But in looking at that, were there any philosophical things? I would assume that from a board perspective, we want as many opportunities for students as we can get, and that we want to maintain that intra-scholastic activities and athletics for our students at the middle level. Important part of kind of feeding skills and feeding our programs. Okay, perfect. I just wanted to check for philosophical alignment. Let's go back up then to 374, student fundraising. This was, I just found it to be old language. I took the WASB new, and this gets at, again, some philosophical pieces around fundraising, and I've highlighted one piece. So what are our thoughts and feelings around fundraising? I specifically call out directly soliciting sales and donations to a broader community. You know, remember the days when you'd go door to door and sell candy bars? Those days are over. So how do we want to come around fundraisers? And then do we want to put any kind of limitations at the school level? That's what I've highlighted there, is do you want to limit schools to 3 around a community base? You know, what does that look like in our community?
So, let's see, I'm looking at the policy and lines 10, 11, 12.
Uh-huh.
Basically, you know, asking for donations in the broader community must be improved in advance. I think that's a good idea.
I do too.
I think it's a good idea because you just want to be sure that we're not necessarily confusing the community if there are multiple fundraising activities coming from multiple directions. And I think also just from a sense of awareness, so that in this case, I think it says the building principal,
Yep.
or perhaps by the district administrator. And I think from an awareness perspective, that helps, because that's an opportunity to make sure that it's being kept to an appropriate number, if you know what I'm saying.
Yep, and the other pieces in lines 19 through 22, it talks about us as being in fiduciary control of those funds. So they're solicited with an intent, and then we are monitoring. We're bound by audits, we're bound by all sorts of things, so that, you know, it's not just like, oh, a teacher solicited money for something and you know, they've got it in their desk drawer. That's not what happens at all, right? So how does that do? The only one thing I had a question about in their sample language was, if any one school wishes to have more than 3 such community-based fundraisers in a school year, they had to be approved at the district level. And that would say, you can tell this is their stock language because it says district administrator. I would just change that to superintendent.
Mhm.
So do we want any kind of limit there? Do we not, it's not saying I'm gonna say no, it's just saying like, hey, if Silverbrook is doing 3 huge fundraisers, like, and now they wanna do a 4th one, that there's some other checks and balances on that.
Yeah.
Or we don't need it now, I don't
like-
know what the history is here.
I like having some oversight, but then how do you score, you know, the football team, East and West, they both do their discount cards. And then you got
Booster clubs.
basketball that's doing something, so is it 3 at the school level, or is it 3
Those are
here?
booster clubs, which are separate than us.
Okay,
I do not take that in until the booster club is the one who makes a donation to whatever, and then we become the fiscal agent.
do we need to call that out in here, that that's separate and not governed by this?
We might want to.
Because
if
I
that's
would
booster
have
stuff.
assumed that was all under one domain.
Yeah, we might wanna call that out separately, dig into that, do some expansion of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, line 15 kind of talks about all other activities not addressed in the first 3 paragraphs, but the
Right.
first 3 paragraphs aren't even all that clear.
Right.
And,
How clear do you wanna be? You know,
Chase your tail.
this is lawyer talk.
you know, I think back to when my kids were in elementary school, and during the school day, the PTO or PTA, whatever you call it, had an all-school assembly to kick off a fundraiser,
Mm-hmm,
but technically the fundraiser was for the PTO.
yeah, correct, that's not the school.
And that wasn't for the school, but the kickoff
We would be the
activity-
recipient,
But the kickoff activity was held during school, during an all-school assembly.
right.
And so, now in line 8 talks about student participation is certainly voluntary, but what if I don't even want my kid to go to that school assembly that day?
Then they don't have to.
Well, correct, but I mean, how specific do we want to be about, do we allow PTOs to even have such assemblies during the school day?
I don't know the prevalence of those, but those kickoffs are they usually embed it with some other lessons, some other
Yes.
things, and they make it kind of fun. It's, you know, your school community coming together, and then it's pretty minimal in time. It's not like they're spending an hour,
No,
you know,
and you're
getting-
right.
you know, like,
My
you
kids
must
were
go out
before,
now
and
and
it
sell
was
door to door, you know, that kind of thing.
enforcing good behaviors during the school,
Yeah,
I mean, it was
yeah.
other things, absolutely, so.
So let's dig in a little bit more and try and find clarity from WASB around different entities that might be deeply connected. Their sole purpose is to fundraise, you know, for the students, and how that isn't connected. Let's talk about that piece of time during a student's day. And then, like you said, maybe less is more and more is more in some other spots on this one.
Paul, can I ask you a question, just as the former coach? You're talking about literally every sports team and their individual fundraiser in that case.
Yeah, basically.
And each one of those comes back direct to us, not through a booster club currently?
Right.
So you're right,
It's a
that
booster.
3 goes very fast,
Mhm.
because those 3, under this policy, if adopted this way, would actually count against those 3.
So on August 25th,
Now, if
I
someone
gotta
makes
run
a
to Ralph
donation,
and John's
it does
office
not.
before anybody
They're
else
selling
can
a
make my
card
claim.
for services, they're selling product, they're
That's the
selling.
booster clubs.
No, our school sports teams are currently doing this.
Your
What
middle
Paul-
school teams are?
Not so much middle school, but high school is.
High school.
I think that's what you're referencing.
Yeah,
Well, this is just the former
discount
football
card
coach.
goes for a year and.
Aren't they running that through Booster?
No, that comes back into athletics.
I buy a card directly from a football player I don't think it's through Booster at all.
Right, but it might be sponsored by Booster. I'll talk with our agents.
I'd also
on
like to
that
get
current
clarification of where do we have school-specific activities that would fall into this domain? Because, yeah, I can think about, you know, like at Green Tree, when the girls were there, you know, the gift wrap fundraiser.
Exactly.
But that was a PTO thing.
Right. So where's that intersection of outside agencies and those pieces, and looking a little bit deeper on
Did
that?
WASB have a couple of different samples? You don't have to.
I will
look.
look-
Well, this
yeah,
is
I'll look
obviously
again.
something that
Nothing-
we'll bring back.
Nothing that was any earth-shattering.
Maybe.
But I'll ask those clarifying questions and say, all right, so that's part of your service, so we can say, you know what, I just call up the team of lawyers, they give me one of them, and I say, this is what we were struggling with, give me some language around this, and they'll actually help you rewrite that language to meet your individual needs.
I always like the less is more
Yep.
idea.
Me too.
And maybe as we looked at this draft language, it was maybe too much language and
Mhm.
made it even less clear, if that makes sense. I don't know, we do a lot of fundraising around here for,
Yeah, I'm torn too, and I feel strongly both ways, because on the one hand, it would be nice to have a step-by-step, which would be very, very long, but because there's so many of these. But on the other hand, the more words, it just may make it unclear.
I like that the superintendent or designee needs to have approval for what happens fundraising wise inside of a school.
Yeah,
We shouldn't
we
be
should have
selling,
awareness, yeah.
you know, for some basketball league out of Brookfield doing fundraisers up here in our schools for a kid who happens to play in some private basketball league down there. I mean, we need to know what's going on
Right.
fundraising wise, so I do like that language for sure.
Well, and that it's optional, like kids shouldn't
Yes.
feel forced to do it. I'll ask them to kind of marry our current, we like how lean this is, we think we need clarity around these pieces, marry those together for us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Looking into those 400s, the 411, that's what we need to look at and bring into alignment with some of the Title IX pieces, so that's one of those interconnected. So now that we've talked about that other piece, got a little direction there. There's a student harassment, and we do not have that. There's bullying, and then there's harassment in there. I will check with legal if I have to have a standalone or if our language meets the test of that inside of those other policies. So that's the question I would be bringing forward for that piece, because it is a mandated piece. And just as in 411, you'll see my mandated, just so I call this out, in 411, it's nested within that, it includes accommodations for religious beliefs in there. So that is one of those checklists, like I have to have something. That's where I found it, that's where it is. So that's me making note. So I'm just wondering if I can't show some language to meet this test somewhere else on that one. That's why I didn't draft or link anything. So that would be a legal question.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
this is probably a very silly question, but there, 411.2 talks about education of children and youths.
Yes,
What's the difference between a children and a youth?
young adult.
Oh, young, that's a young adult. A youth
So
is
I think
considered
it
young
goes to
adult.
the coding of homeless, so when they do the a homeless audit, I wanna say I feel like it's in January of every year, they go out and canvas.
Mhm.
And I think they do it by specific age brackets, in that audit.
Okay.
So when you look at the technicality of those titles, I think that's what it's corresponding
Okay,
to.
so that's a term of art.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's what brackets they're falling into aligned with the state coding of homelessness.
Okay, thank you.
And Sharon, our Director of Pupil Services, just submitted an update to the AR to be in alignment. The policy was up to date. She was just, she didn't set the access correctly. I'll make sure you have that on that one. Jen will be available. She's got the access set wrong on that. She just was bringing in the AR, again, that's just in alignment with the policy and calling out some things around making sure that as we welcome families who may be experiencing homelessness, there's certain things that we do as schools. We talk about school of origin, because one thing that makes a difference in a child's experience and success in school is transitions, the number of transitions you put them through. So the McKinney-Vento Act and other pieces, and there's separate policy on that too, is how you welcome students and what rights and protections they have, and how you make sure your education is in their best interest. They're not barred from that. They're not experiencing some kind of issue because of that status of being homeless. So I'll make sure you've got that in your board update so you can review Sharon's changes, recommended changes. I found nothing unique. They were in alignment with the policy.
Sounds good.
All right, 421 AR, 421 exhibit, 421-1, all of these around school admissions. If you look over to the side, Emily and I worked on minimally the admission to kindergarten and first grade, collapsing it all down, making it a lot clearer, driving them to connect with the district. And then still holding with, we don't do early enrollment to 4-year-old kindergarten. You know, without the certain birth dates kind of thing, and then it's holding to the law around compulsory attendance, starts at age 6. So maybe a child is in a home-based education program, and then it's when do they start into the school and how do they enter, and early entrance. So this is about the entrance.
So the draft, paragraph 2 that starts on line 13, except as provided under the district's condition standards and procedures for early admission to 5-year-old kindergarten, no child may be admitted to 5-year-old kindergarten in the district unless the child is 5 years old. But then you've also got 421.1.
Yep, so we would take this whole slate of them
Okay,
and collapse it. So when I talk about 421, it's the AR, the exhibit, all of it, collapsing it down. When you look at the, there's so many tabs open, I should get a prize. So it's requiring certain procedures. We would write the AR around these things and clean all of that up. So it's driving them to us. In the current one, they need to go away. They're listing tests that we don't give, they're
Right.
listing all this stuff, that's not in alignment. We want something cleaner, tighter, contact us, here's the process by which we're.
I guess as I read that paragraph now, it's kind of like, yeah, you might be falling under conditions, but unless you're 5 on this date, you can't enter. Well, that's not necessarily true. We do have some conditions that are in your AR and that are in,
So you want it to be
I
inverted?
guess not inverted.
To
but
say
maybe
it's 5-year-old, because it's leading with, except as provided,
Can
you
you
have to be this
reference,
date.
can you reference something there that shows, here's where you need to go if you think your kid qualifies?
Sure.
Well, I probably can.
You can, I would just put it, I can put it right in here and not even have it in an AR then around, so here's who you contact. You would just contact Director of Early Learning. One thing that's really interesting, it doesn't come up here, but we will bring it forward, we have some work to do. There is a phenomenon of redshirting your kids out of kindergarten.
I'm not sure what that means.
So if you were to redshirt a sport at the
Right.
collegiate level, it means you're gonna sit out a year.
Right,
We get people who wanna sit out of kindergarten, and I call that redshirting kindergarten.
So they'd start when they're 6.
So they call it, like, we don't wanna start yet. We wanna delay kindergarten. Why? Oh, they're tiny for their age, they're immature, they're this, they're that, so we need to put some things around the opposite of this too. So this is the early entrance end, but we also will, like Emily and I were talking about that phenomenon, and I've seen that
oh,
everywhere it went. And I said, well, that doesn't belong here in early entrance, it'll belong on the back end around retention, because they're asking you to retain before we even meet the child, kind of thing. So
I
we
see.
currently have a process for which we work through those, but that's a thing as well.
interesting.
So just so you know, we kind of get the inverse.
Hmm.
All right, so some language around more clearly, what are those exceptions, making it more obvious that there's exceptions, like here's the automatic, but then here's some exceptions and here's who you connect with.
I like
Just
the
making
fact
it very
that, you know, no child's getting into 4-year-old kindergarten unless you're 4.
Yeah,
And then it's almost like, you know, here are the procedures for getting into 5-year-old kindergarten. If you,
there's some observations, there's cognitive testing, there's things that we would be doing. We can embed them with flexibility in here. And like you said, lead with like, here's your automatic birthday, but then there's some exceptions for early, because the whole policy is early entrance.
and maybe if you can, like you talked about, collapse those, it'll make 421 a hair longer, but then you hopefully will
Get rid of everything else.
Yes.
some everything else stuff.
Perfect.
Well then,
All right, we'll put those couple of things in there, so it's kind of one complete package. That takes us all the way, we just did open next one is another big slate, right, around attendance. And all those exhibits and all those form letters and all those pieces, I don't, those haven't been revisited in years. So I would say we get those out of there and we reset our compulsory attendance language.
Do you like this WASB draft that I'm looking at right now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's calling out our obligation pieces. And then I would make sure that the appropriate kind of family language and process is in the student handbook around that. That's where families go for that. I don't need old forms sitting here in policy. I want the process very clear of, here's how you call this in, here's when you're gonna get a letter, here's when we're gonna, you know, so that process is there for families.
So just to recap, 431,
431.
you kind of like this WASB language, and we could
Update.
potentially get rid of all these different exhibits,
get rid
put
of
it
all of
in
them.
student handbooks
Yep.
and things like that.
Yeah, I would just clearly articulate the process by which we monitor and notify families
Yeah.
of attendance practices.
Fine with me.
I agree.
School attendance area. So it's not required. It's one of Chris's favorites where he found, he's like, wait a second, there's some on here without check marks. This would be one of them. It needs to be updated. We are about to enter this lovely policy that says you have to write the superintendent a personal letter saying you want your school changed. Anyone with a comprehensive registrar, you don't need that. You just need some deadlines. It should be an online form. They submit it at timestamp. It's lottery driven. It's no different than, you know, it's first come, first serve, or it's lottery, but everything is dependent on space in schools and in classrooms and things like that. So I think it's lovely to have intra-district choice, right? So we do want to have that. And so it's, what this is, it's setting the attendance area, but then it's setting the exception for your attendance area. So you can attend outside of your attendance area if, right, we can accommodate that. And if you choose to do that, we won't transportations on you. So we already have some of that fundamentally on the books, but they have to write letters to me. So I would like to flip that to a process. First of all, in my past, we set a window for kind of choice, inter-district choice. We set a window for that. We usually set it prior to the open enrollment window, right? We want to take care of our current enrollment and what their preferences are first before we entertain outside choice. So I would open that probably, if it had a March open sitting in this policy, I'd open it now. In the future, I'd open it right in January, it doesn't matter. And I would close it out probably by March. But in this case, I'll close it somewhere around, I would say March to, you know, the end of April kind of thing. That gives families plenty of time. They can still apply. But philosophically, from the board, I would be entertaining that, generally alerting families, here's the window, here's the process, it's online, you fill it in. I have always time and date stamped everything that come in. They can drop it off at the school, but whoever's receiving it has to time and date stamp. And it's first come, first serve, and then we look at where we have seats. Unless the board feels differently and wants that to be just an open window and then a lottery at the end. There's a philosophical decision.
I think first come, first served puts the onus on the parents. If this is serious, then you're gonna take care of it.
I do too. You know, I'd be hard pressed, you know, I think that we just really have to promote it. And in the current policy, it was saying like you had to fill in this form and you have to do this. That's not how it works anymore. It's here's a link or here's the form, here's how you want it. We send it out, we trumpet it out to the world. It's gonna open on this day, or we'll receive them on this day somewhere, get them in. They usually are in right away. Like you said, the people who are waiting are looking for it. But again, it's just keeping with the times that it's an electronic process, it's time and date stamped, and then it's dependent on space in the schools, in the classroom. And
If
then,
you go electronic, is there a component of equity there that you gotta be careful of?
also make it a form, so saying like, oh, or you can get the form in your school office and do that,
Yes.
and then anyone receiving it, just time and date stamps.
Okay.
It drives more, like I said, I'll still accept it that way, but it drives more to the electronic, because then you have, again, less hands in it, and you're assured when you put the time and date stamp right on it, when you receive it electronically. But anyone that gets turned inside, so anytime there's a form that needs to be returned, I always want to make sure that those are available in the school. You know, and if you need this form, you can click here and get it, or you can ask for it in the school office, you know, have your child bring one home, so that, like you said, there's not the onus on the family to have print resources, that kind of thing. They have access to the form, and they can just send it right in the backpack if they want, or bring it over here, it doesn't matter.
I'm assuming there's no change happening for this next school year starting September 1, so we've got 11 months to refine the process, the messaging.
We don't open this till March. I'd like to just have an electronic option going
Okay.
right forward in March.
Okay.
So there's just the one line, request for an interdistrict transfer must be made in writing and submitted to the superintendent by the first Friday in March for attending the following year. You can keep it, it's just for practice.
Are you proposing on policy 432
Correct.
that we keep the fact that, especially high school, that we keep in here that odd number of birthdays go to west, even number of birthdays go to east?
Okay, that's a fallacy in our district, just so you're aware. So not stated, this is why I'm like, okay, it's not required, recommended, we need to talk about these. Because I was met this, 2 months ago, that also somewhere buried in practice is the superintendent has to send a letter to every 8th grader, literally asking them what school they want to go to. And I had no recourse, no policy, no language, no anything to deny anyone. So it's like, you just ask them when they're in 8th grade, where do you want to go? And then we get them back, we have to code them all, we do all that. So, I mean, that's interesting language, but they also have an element of inter-district choice. So I would line up all those things, make it one period of choice, and if we can, now, with the high school, because we're under one roof, there had been historically some things around keeping the two high schools balanced. They're only out of balance, I think, by a couple hundred students. But that was a piece too, where it was like, nope, we asked everyone here too.
I guess thinking of my own kid, you know, he started in 4th grade, junior Spartan basketball. So
Sure.
4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 17. Well, man, if he doesn't get a seat at West Bend West, he is gonna be spearheading with the
We
senior summer.
literally ask them when they're in 8th grade, and I don't deny anyone.
So as long as you don't deny anyone, but as you talk about, well, do we need to balance the schools, or do we need to?
You don't need to balance a high school, they're all under one roof. What you're gonna run into is the impact on athletics if you get one out of whack and you slip from Division I standings.
Sure.
Which is kind of what's driving that imbalance now anyway, because they're
Correct.
changing schools because of a particular program.
Correct.
I just hope we don't lose a full program at one school or another, because every single football player wants to go to.
That's happening right now. I mean, I can tell you the sports that they're choosing. And again, I have no recourse, they can tell you whatever, but they do sign off that you are getting this opportunity as an 8th grade family, you're gonna make this choice and it's binding.
How
So
long
there's
is-
no dancing back and forth, it's right in the letter. And
How
then
long
they
has that
sign
been
it.
in place?
Hmm?
How long has that been in place?
Shortly after, I think I moved over here, Paul and I've been over here 8 years.
Because I don't know that we ever got that, because it would have been for Melanie as she was coming through, and then she would have set the pace for the other two.
Right,
And, no, she was, yeah.
I didn't know that we had that choice. As a parent with young kids coming up, I always thought it was your first kid goes to East or West,
that's what I
The
was,
rest
I'm
of
like,
the kids
show me
follow.
this.
and then if you make a special request that you're.
Yeah,
that a
because
kid
Ted made a
goes-
big deal about open enrollment, and we're gonna cap it at 100 students.
I
But open
believe-
enrollment's outside of the district, this is our
Well,
own enrollment.
Okay, call it
Yep.
this change
Intra-district
here.
enrollment, yep.
But yeah, I remember him touting, keeping the balance within 100 students.
So Paul, I believe this came up, and again, I'm going off my noggin tonight, not looking at dates and stuff, but when the conversation came back around one school versus two school,
Yep.
this is one of the pieces that may have come out of that of, as a choice, my kid's supposed to go one place, they've been sports teams, I'm in the same boat with one of my children,
So the issue.
all that, and they wanted to balance it, and that was one of the reasons given of ways you could defend it as a superintendent, saying, you know what, I can't have 300 kids going to one school and 50 going to the
Right.
other, but I don't believe there are any specific parameters that says 100 is the number at that point.
So here's the other piece to Joel's point. When that high school was built, I've seen the article from the paper where they flipped the coin on how you were gonna go there.
Yeah.
Okay, I've never seen anything like that. And it's got a great history here, whatever. But it also, to your point of how kids identify, I'm a junior this, I'm a junior that, you don't have sense of community, you don't have feeder programs like, oh, I am, as an elementary, I'm kind of going up this way. We commingle everyone in 5, 6, 7, 8, so they become whatever. There's no feeder pattern from the elementary to say, oh, I'm a junior this, I'm a junior that. So your neighborhoods are all like, you know, we can live next door to each other and go to different schools, but it's also the same school, and it's just very interesting. I think so me looking at this, inherently I can make anything work. What I want to protect and preserve is choice for our families. So that there's always an element of intra-district choice. I want a very clear process around that. I want the process to be aligned so that if your family with 3 kids, different ages, like here's the deadlines, the process is the same, here's what I do, done. I don't have to pay attention to this window of time over here and this process there. It's, oh, if this is what I'm interested in, this is what I do. But I wouldn't want to see choice go away. The other piece is, we look at class size. So class size is simple to manage at our elementaries. Because of Silverbrook and Badger, we don't even have to deal with it, like that's where you're going, kind of thing. But it becomes a little bit blurrier at the high school because I think in the past, they used to be, and Tim will be our historian, they used to be more segregated by school. You had staff who were clearly taught for this team or that team, and now they commingle kids. It used to be more east-west segregated classes, but now, which is great, that's efficient for use of teachers, for all of that kind of thing. It's the same courses, that's fine. But I think that's where it gets into making the numbers a little bit more nebulous.
Yeah, we were very much about the core areas of English, math, science, and social studies. You went to your respective school unless there was that big of a scheduling conflict that I would cross
Yeah.
the hallway,
Now
in
it's
essence,
just,
and
I
go to
think,
the other
more wide
building.
open.
When do we start talking about going from 2 schools down to 1?
I think that when we do our community vision, and again, we hope to have physical access to the public, when we talk about the vision for our schools and our community, that's absolutely a question that I have to bring forward and talk with our community around that. It's such a lightning rod issue. I lived in a community myself where we, had to make that determination, 1 or 2, and, people are gonna have really deeply held tradition and feelings around that, but I think we also need to look back to alumni and kids who were graduates and what did or didn't this mean in the last 5 years for you as a student, and make sure we're bringing that into the mix. And I think we kind of work around what that vision includes and the whys behind what we're doing. I don't want to see anything that reduces opportunities for kids. There's ways to work around that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So in this, I just don't think specifically inter-district transfers need to be handled in this way at all. I think it should just be one window. We said first come, first serve. I'm fine right now because it's pretty tight with the high school. We can put some language in here because it's absent around I have final authority in looking at enrollment. but we'll give everyone that opportunity in 8th grade to kind of make a selection. But we'll still put the time and date thing on it and that kind of piece, and then it's final approval by me through the enrollment process.
So if March is when this goes up, and you want to change the posture away from send me a letter and we're gonna go electronic,
We already did the 8th grade one, that was already done, we passed that window. This is just for the
elementary,
K-4.
yeah. So I'm just thinking where we are on the calendar, Feb. 15,
And it can, here's the thing, if you're okay with it, so it just says, request for an inter-district transfer must be made in writing submitted to the superintendent. Exhibit
Writing
1
can
is
be a
simply
form.
exhibit, sunset out that exhibit, so it's not a form, and I'll make it in there, and I will send it to all families and saying, in accordance with policy 432, you need to make this request to me. Here's a link, you can fill it out here,
okay?
or you can turn in this form and just get rid of this as, this is the only way. Then I'm in
Gotcha.
compliance with this as written, and it surfaces that larger conversation around, I believe in choice for our families, but we need an aligned process, and we need to talk about then at the high school level, is there some kind of management piece to it?
Yeah, so you'll redo the whole paragraph on high school. and that-
Yeah,
that
it needs
wording
it.
is-
And like I said, the high school's already on, because you get asked in 8th grade where you wanna go, so that's done. But we wanna keep with that practice of kind of soliciting that, and then some language around that I would have ultimate, I would look at some numbers around the high schools and first come, first served.
3.432 is an exhibit, it is not an AR.
Correct.
No, there's an AR too.
There's some of everything in this one. The exhibit's the form. So they can do that, but I'm also gonna say, or you can do it electronically, you can leave it. But I'm just
Well, I
gonna
would-
communicate to families, you can fill out this,
Or,
or you can fill out this link right here, and I'll count that too.
And then,
I don't see anything in the language that makes that not allowable.
no, I agree, to speed things up, I think eventually we can totally delete.
The AR is talking about, your,
Eligibility.
yeah, it's like your preferences, and that should all be rolled into policy. You shouldn't have a separate, well, then this is how we really do it behind the scenes. If you're going to give preference, so you usually have preference, just like we did with out-of-district enrollment. If you have a sibling in attendance, if you have something like that, there should be priority or preference given in that. That should get folded into your policy.
A lot of this AR talks about the high school anyway, which again, we're not,
Yeah, that should tell. The other piece at the high school, it is kind of nice that you're forcing kind of that decision point or giving that opportunity in 8th grade, because there are ramifications if you are a sophomore or older, if you play varsity sports, you mess up your WIA eligibility. So you have to be cognizant of that piece too. So a lot of families don't think about that.
Because you're truly changing schools.
Correct. Even though you're under the same roof and all of that, you're still two schools. So if you've played varsity sports, if you've done something, you would be deemed ineligible and you'd have to sit out. So once you start, kind of, you can't switch for a sport necessarily. All right, so I think I have what I need to give parents the access this year, so they don't have to write me a fancy letter. If they want to, they can. So we'll make it a little bit easier on our families, we'll start that on time according to this policy, and then we'll bring back and really kick the rock over around creating a nice uniform choice process for our families.
up to you, but I would delete the AR
Oh, yeah,
right away just to avoid confusion on,
works for me. Sound good?
sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, 441.2, if you look at that, this was the one not recommended, not anything, but read that. This is allowing student members to serve in a non-voting advisory capacity to the board with an election process.
And this hasn't been touched since 2009,
Correct.
goes all the way back to 1967.
So the way, one, we do have student reporters who come and engage with the board, talk about that, we highlight programs. When we talk about kind of strategic sessions around vision and things like that, all of our students will be engaged. I mean, it sounds funny, but you engage kids all the way down to kindergarten. What do you think about your school? What do you love? And what do you want? And those kinds of things. So there should be some students that are really part of, all students would have voice in that, but maybe that's where we look at ensuring there's some standing student members to a committee of sorts. Or we can look at this again and see if you want, they're excluded from things around personnel and making motions, stuff like that, but I don't see the need for this.
Yeah, I think, when issues have come up that have been relevant to the students and germane and points of concern, they certainly are
Come,
welcome during public participation. They have come.
Yep.
As you said, we've got our student reporters. With everything else they've got going on in their day and their life, working and so forth, coming and sitting through a 2-hour board meeting as
Right,
a representative without having a vote,
right, no voice. They
yes.
also have their own student government in those pieces, so,
Well, as a board, if we encounter a topic where we say, boy, it would be really great if we could hear from some students, I would imagine that we can put it on the agenda for a future meeting and,
grading.
I'm sorry?
Grading would be a
Mhm.
perfect one,
Okay.
where you're not just gonna hear from
Right.
grown-ups, you hear from students. The last district I was in, it was actually an 8th grader who brought forward the policy on grading and presented and did those pieces.
I just read this too, and I wasn't aware of the policy, but there isn't even, I mean, as I'm reading this, there isn't a limit to how many could be elected to serve on the board in non-advisory capacity.
Right.
It doesn't say there'll be 1, or there'll be 2,
It doesn't
or there'll be
say.
10.
Yeah.
So could I maybe fast track that one for removal, since we don't do it?
I don't know that you can fast track a deletion of the policy.
I think deletion takes
Well,
2.
can I at least put that on,
Yeah.
is everyone in concurrence that
Yes.
we should delete it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Policy can be deleted after consideration at 2 board meetings and
Yeah.
approval of majority vote that goes on second. So,
Yeah.
yes,
Second,
yes.
perfect. So I'll bring that one forward right away.
sounds good.
And then we'll, like I said, I'll go forward with 2 meetings in action. Wasn't that interesting though, the things
Yeah.
Very
when
interesting.
you read every single policy we have?
This was
That'd
adopted.
be interesting if, who are the advisors of student councils?
Skip Clark.
Yeah, because Megan never asked me about this, so I don't even know if it's socially
Well, that's the
out
other
there.
thing I find interesting in the way we do policy is, like you said, this is, when you look back at how we say what it was, this is something on the book since the 60s.
It's just
So it's just like, well,
Good intent,
absolutely, but.
and not that we want to take opportunity away from our kids, for those of you who are watching, but
Mhm.
it just,
Well,
Right.
Right, and this is speculation, which I should not engage in, but if we're talking about 1967, 1972, when it was adopted and revised, we were not in an electronic age.
Right.
And so the idea of widely communicating things to students would have taken on a whole different methodology back in 1967 or 1972. Now, the ability to keep students aware through these televised meetings, I mean, it's a whole different,
Well, and you're not without high school student participation at your
Right,
meetings
right.
as well. And highlighting other programs and pieces as they come forward, so, okay,
Before you go on,
yes.
I just want to ask the group, it is 6 o'clock. Does anybody, what do you think? Do you want to keep plowing through some of these? Are we done for the night? Do you want to take a quick 5-minute break? What would you like to do? John,
how much were you hoping to get through tonight?
I'm impressed that we got through this much.
do you have other things you planned on going to tonight?
Nope, I got
didn't know if
nothing.
you had, meetings or sports or something?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm fine continuing on, but I'm not offended if someone wants to end early, but I'm fine.
I'm good for another half hour.
Okay, why don't we
Let's.
All right.
keep going, we'll
Keep
see how we
going.
feel at 6:30.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so that was the line 93. Look at how far we are. Non-voting. Student conduct. Again, there's some WASB template language there to bring it up to date. It hasn't been reviewed since 2012. And it's, again, just referencing code of conduct, that kids can be removed from class, all those same things. It's just more of the most up-to-date language. And again, discrimination language in there, those pieces.
Yeah, and I know we touched on this before, but just to make sure I have it in my mind, there are, many policies that have that non-discrimination language. And I have no problem with it being in all those policies, but isn't there something to be said for having one discrimination policy and just have it referred? Because otherwise, if we ever change non-discrimination language, we have to touch like 19 policies.
Yeah. See, you've been sitting here so long, I talked about that earlier.
Okay.
And said that I tried
You
with WASB in my former life, and some of them have to have it.
Okay.
And we said, can't we just say, we'll follow the district's non-discrimination statement? So we continue to kind of fight that battle of
Okay.
what's required, but then I keep a master list of every single one that has it in it. So when that gets touched, they automatically all get updated. I say, and these contain this statement would be updated, and it all comes forward as one package.
Okay.
But we have been talking about that,
Thank you.
and it's just under legal guidance, where you put it, where you don't. Because we do have a comprehensive non-discrimination audit, and they go through your policies, and they will look for them. And that's every, I want to say 5 years. And they go, and they'll say you're missing it if you don't have it.
Okay.
I think 443 looks good to be brought to the board. It's it's short, yet it is a hair more than what we've had since 28 or 12 or whatever, 2012.
2012.
And references, handbooks, code of classroom conduct, pretty basic type stuff, but important, so.
Yeah, and that AR down there, that's the code of classroom conduct and grounds for removal, like if there's something in there you want to see added to the policy, this is from 2008, it's not in alignment with even the handbooks, I would remove. And anything that needed to be aligned or that you felt should be present in policy should be moved to policy on that one.
The AR is longer than the current policy.
Exactly, and like I said, it's not even, when you have too many things, so then you have to go through, is every single handbook aligned to this, is this that, you're better off with something there and then the piece to the people who need it in that manner. So I'm just putting that out, I would remove this if there's anything that you want from this that you think is important.
As you said earlier, this is in student handbooks.
Yeah, it's their code of conduct and their discipline and all those things are reiterated in there. And it also, part of your annual notice for families and for students and for staff is these specific policies that we have to provide. But again, the ARs, to me, why would I force a family, give them the information that they need, where they need it? Because who would know to look for another AR, and who would know, I have to go 3-step, it didn't make sense to me in this case. Almost creating confusion. So is that okay with the board? Okay. The next one, the anti-bullying was up to date. We just have to review it in relation to that 113 and any of the Title IX pieces. Search and seizure. 446.1. If you take a look at that, I had some philosophical questions. So this isn't too terribly off. The language is pretty similar. But there's some pieces philosophically around so property, not a student's property. So we have access to those. But there's pieces around in other policies, around, like the use of canine units, the use of those kinds of things in different search and seizure pieces. Now, I know that we don't specifically have canine units, in West Bend, but those are some of the philosophical pieces that would be present in some of the template language. So I didn't know if we wanted to kind of discuss some of those things. Let me go through. So, you can go general. This one is specifically talking about search and seizures with lockers, or you can generalize that more to student searches. And, you know, a student and his or her belongings may be searched if, right, we have reasonable grounds, we have evidence of kind of a violation, the manner in which a search is reasonable, and it's not intrusive in light of a child's age, sex of the student, nature of the infraction, that kind of thing. So in a generalized one, you would call out, there's no strip searches of any student ever. There's nothing like that. So ours is just getting into kind of lockers, but there's more general kind of those things. And they would get into use of canine units or search-related activities, warrants. There's a lot of other pieces. So this is kind of philosophy of the board.
Yeah, I think, do we have anything governing searches of backpacks today?
No, it might be embedded in discipline or something like that, referencing students who are carrying something, but.
Because I would assume that making this broader than just lockers would apply to backpacks and things of that nature, that a lot of space in there, and who knows what they might be hiding.
Yeah, it does. So in the past, I've used other templates from WASB, and I specifically stated a student and his or her belongings may be searched if reasonable grounds. So it is expanding it to belongings, or like I said, but then it's giving you really clear parameters, because I think everyone hears horror stories in the news around, you know, search that shouldn't have occurred, and it's sort of laying out the foundation of where we can and can't. So again, we're looking at a child's age, making sure we're non-invasive, making sure we're, you know, that there's gender alignment, making sure all those things, ensuring that no one is removing any articles of clothing kind of thing. There's none of that. So I can grab that language and put that forward for you to look at if that's something that you're interested, or if you'd like to just contain it to.
Well, I'd like to see proposed, you know, possible.
Just for
Open
discussion.
it just for discussion, because I think if, it's important that we communicate expectations with parents and with our students, so that if they shouldn't have an expectation of privacy in their backpack, then we should be very clear about that.
Right.
And so if that's the way that we want to administer, then we should be clear about that. So, but I think, you know, we haven't seen the language yet, but we'll take a look.
So I'll bring that back to committee with some of that, just expanding that language. Is there any thoughts around canine units in school?
We do have a canine in West Bend
Oh, is there one?
and Washington County.
Okay. Any thought of use of them in schools?
I think they bring them through on their drills now, don't they?
They haven't in a while.
Probably, the last time I know it was at least 10 years ago.
Really?
And they're always, it's Washington County, it's not the local PD that would bring in, or Germantown, or somebody else at that point.
Yeah.
And it was served both purposes, training for them and for searching.
We have a dog in Washington County named Riker.
Yep.
And now I'm wondering, do we have one in Western PD? I don't know if
I don't know about the PD here, but
I don't know.
it's been a long, long time, and I don't remember ever coming across.
I feel like when I met with
members.
the chief for the very first time, I asked specifically
Yeah.
around that, and if that was a practice
I'm not
here, and I didn't think they had a dog.
I don't know.
I think that's right. I think that's correct. They don't have a dog, I think. No, is it possible to see language on
Yep.
that as well?
Yep.
Yes.
I would bring that forward.
Anytime you have a police officer involved in a search on school grounds, now the police are taking over that scene. They're taking over that, our policy wouldn't matter at that point, correct?
Correct, and there's pieces in that expanded language around when police are involved, if there's warrants involved, that
Okay,
kind of thing.
okay.
So
Yeah,
I'll bring
I-
that forward for us to look at, and that helps you to know when do we, especially that interplay with, school resource officers, school liaisons.
Yeah,
Where's that line?
got it.
And when do we refer it to them, when do they take over, and then what's their responsibilities when they're acting as a school liaison officer, and when are they a police officer for the general public? I'll bring that forward. Same thing with, I flat out just gave you the template, I didn't even take time to rewrite it, because I wasn't sure where you would land on student discipline, so I just gave you a sample.
Let me click on what we currently have real quick on
Yep.
this one.
Good, I'll grab a drink of water. Did anyone need water?
No, no, thanks.
No, thank you.
I'm good.
Paul?
I'm good.
That's where my glasses went. I ran back upstairs for my glasses.
I've been looking at those, I don't want you to roll over.
Yes.
Do you not like what we have? It's longer than the sample.
I was just giving you the most recent language. In there,
Ours is, from
From
2012.
2010.
10?
yeah,
Okay.
so that was the reason why. Or yeah. Just giving you the one that was updated. Because I noticed it wasn't aligned.
Wait a minute, appropriate use of seclusion and strength. Am I
That's-
looking at the right one?
Nope, that's down
Oh,
further.
I
You're on
clicked-
student
I'm
discipline,
sorry, I
line
clicked on
102.
the Wrong one, sorry.
Line 102, when I looked at the actual legal language, those pieces, oh, you know what, 447, I think she's got it linked wrong.
Yeah.
She does. She does. Hang
Let me
on.
go to the
Oh, okay.
website here.
Our
I was gonna say
website's
it's
got it.
seclusion and restraint.
Yeah, she's just got the
Okay.
wrong thing, hang on.
If you go to the website, you can pull it up.
Yeah, and I'll relink it real quick, so it's not inaccurate.
Seven students.
What number were we looking at, Joel, for real?
447.
Thank you.
Okay, this is quite a bit longer than what the sample policy is. Corporal punishment, who's responsible?
All right, I have the appropriate link there now, if you're following along.
You know, this is, to me, is one of those examples of less is more. And that's why I kind of like the WASB policy. It's 4 paragraphs, it's pretty simple. And you've got the non-discrimination as one of those paragraphs, but the rest of it is pretty simple.
So in 447 currently, you have something around corporal punishment, which I would deem that different than use of physical force, which we also don't have. So it's noted in there as corporal punishment, but there's physical force is even, you know, when you get into seclusion or restraint, it's restricting someone's ability to move past you out of a room kind of thing, and doing anything like that. So then we should be looking at, if you like the WASB tighter one, again, you're gonna have a lot of those other things in other student conduct, all those people, again, that's where it's like, how many times do you wanna have stuff out? Take a look at the physical force. The use of physical force, there should be something in place on that. So when you think of seclusion and restraint annually, the board hears a report of that. There is use of seclusion and restraint in some cases in protection of a student's safety, when they become a risk to themselves or others. Only certified staff who have gone through a course in that can engage in that. This is in an emergency case. So it speaks to physical force, so let's say there was a physical fight or something, and, you know, someone's someone's trying to remove kids from an area kind of thing. So it gives you that piece, but it's relying on, that's a last resort. In most cases where you're getting into an actual physical restraint, you're usually an underlying emotional or behavioral need, and that's something you actually generally have in a student's IEP, and you practice with the child in moments of calm, that kind of piece, so. And again, that gets reported to all boards annually, so that you're always in the know on that. So hearing it's good to go tighter on the student discipline, but then we need to look at the mandated piece of physical force by staff, and this is WASB's language.
I like the idea of splitting it out into two using the template language.
The other piece right below it, you'll see there's another one I gave you, WASB template, where you can push in the staff use of physical force and seclusion and restraint. You can commingle that into one policy. So I just flat up gave you that template. It's philosophical whether you would like those together or separate. The name would contain both. If we were to do that and have it renamed, so that second one is in line 104 in the recommendation column, 447.1, and it says combination. So if we wanted to go a combination route for use of physical force as well as seclusion and restraint, that's what we would do. Does the board have any preference?
I'm okay with combining them.
Yeah, the themes are very closely
Mhm.
linked, so.
Yeah, I don't think it would be confusing, so to go the combination route,
Right.
because the title still has both those names specifically in it. So again, most people are searching for that if they're looking for it, or we know where to look if we're administrators. So
Sure.
I would have no problems recommending the combination, so I'll mark that as that's the one we discuss and kind of bring forward. I'll clean that up then, because I just brought forward the whole template and the decision points. The other piece that I found interesting was appropriate use of seclusion and restraint, the AR. I would move to remove that because the detail is now in the updated policy. It's unnecessary and again, just competing information. Okay, so then I would get rid of that. Suspension and expulsion. So we have it on the books. I just brought forward the most recent language to bring it up to date for your consideration.
Our policy, I believe, outlines somewhat of a timeline, doesn't it? People may be suspended for not more than 5 school days, or if an expulsion hearing is pending for not more than 15.
Those are all driven by statute, and they're in the statute language.
Okay.
So if you would like to state them here for clarity, we can. But otherwise, those are all procedural.
I guess if I were a parent who had a kid in this situation.
Having that there.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, if you were a parent and had a kid in this situation, you better be having a conversation with the principal about that.
So yeah, if you're a parent in that situation, you actually get direct letters that lay out everything to you. We don't leave it up to you to go sort it through a policy.
Yeah.
You're being talked to every step of the way. You're given rights brochures, who to contact at the state for advocacy, and all sorts of things. So this is just an overarching policy piece.
I'm fine with that.
That meaning the language does not need to be.
Then you don't need to have a lot of this language that's in our current policy of 5 days, because it actually, in our current policy, it makes it read like it's our local policy, when truly it's a state statute.
Yeah, it's a process.
Right.
And it's tightly governed, because that's a piece where they can get overturned.
Yeah, not to mention then ultimately, if for whatever reason that state statute changes, then we have to
Right, then
raise
you gotta
back
come
and
back.
change our own policy, so.
Could we have just some generic passing reference to, in accordance with Wisconsin state statute, blah, 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 to at least let somebody know who's looking at this that there is a higher level authority that has put some parameters around this, but I agree, you don't necessarily want to reference the statute by by paragraph and section and so forth.
So on the proposal, line 75, 76, it says enforced in accordance with state law requirements,
Okay.
for some of that. Do you want me to just?
So,
use
and
the
then
whole
79 does give you those statutes, so I
Yeah,
guess you're.
I mean, we give you the statutes, but I can lead with that too. You know what I
Well-
mean? So it's in accordance with, I can put a leading sentence in there. just
With the
easy.
statutes referenced in this policy, done.
So I would leave it, I would just say in accordance with state statute. This is what, we'll, make there a leading sentence in there.
Yeah.
And then, so now just highlighting, because I'm not sure where the board is, that in an expulsion order, we can do early reinstatement, and those are conditions that we talk about and go through. I would assume that's been part of your practice, that you're aware of that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, just making sure. So go with that, add an opener that just shows that we're aligning ourselves to practice.
Does that at all create an inconsistency style-wise with, you've got other policies that reference state statutes and you don't have that opening paragraph? Yes, it does. Do we worry about it?
Yeah, do you want just to preamble the policy? So that, at the top of how, below our, many are governed by state statute, but it's up to local. You could,
So at the
That
top
kind of-
level of all policies.
above all, it's just
Yeah.
like, here's, like almost
Oh.
taking our philosophy and just say, many are mandated or part of state statute. You'll see those references within it, just
At the end of
leading
the
them to
policy,
that.
and done. Then, yeah.
You're talking about kind of an overarching.
Yeah, just, part of, a board's responsibility is to develop policy. Many of our policies are, in accordance with state statute. You will, those will be noted in policy by looking here. You can find those references.
It's a nice
Just to
breadcrumb
help
for
them,
someone.
yeah.
Sure, it's helpful.
Okay.
With regard to student suspensions and expulsions, I
Mhm.
don't know if it addresses this or not. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but how much of that is subject to public record and how much is not? And is that something that, I'm guessing that's governed somewhere else and does not need to be a part of this, but,
So that's in there's some pieces in student privacy and all of that.
okay?
So someone could make records requests about certain things, but we go through redaction to protect students' names. And
Okay.
then the expulsion process itself is a closed hearing.
Right,
So those are all subject to closed hearings.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
But yeah, if someone came calling for like a student record, we would redact.
That's,
A lot of things
that's
we
handled
don't-
elsewhere, we don't need to park
Same
park
thing, yeah.
additional stuff here for that, okay,
Mhm.
all right.
Student wellness, that's one of those rocks that needs to get kicked over, student wellness is okay. When you go to the connection, I've made a note that we should also have a comprehensive school wellness policy, that's 458. That you need so if 458 is mislabeled, so I'm just gonna keep us on the wellness topic, okay? So follow with me, 109 is 452 student wellness.
Mhm.
That's up to date and fine. We need to have a 458, which is school wellness. We have a 458, it's privacy in locker rooms and restrooms. That should be 731.1, so I'll go through that in a little bit. Part of the comprehensive school wellness, I gave you sample language from WASB. You may or may not be aware, but you have to convene an entire team around school wellness. Your policy and practice is actually graded by the state. You get a little report card each year on it. I don't think we got them last year. But this is directing, the WASB template kind of lays out the process. It has to be formally evaluated every 3 years. It's in compliance with the process of which you would do those things. So that's what that template is. We do not have any of that evident here, just so you're aware. So we would have to put the policy in place, convene the committee, do all these things. That does not exist.
And that is mandatory.
Correct, it is.
Is that 458?
It's the real 458.
Okay.
Should be that. Okay, so our student wellness side was good, but we needed to have some comprehensive school wellness. So line 109 was fine, that's up to date. 458, we need to lay out what our practice is for a district committee. That's the real 458.
Do you like this WASB sample on that one?
It's nice, gives me enough wiggle room to convene a group, do what we need to do, and bring it forward, make sure it's transparent. The pieces around wellness, are around exercise and, you know, things like that, a lot of things that schools are already doing. We're just not capturing it that way.
So what's the general difference between student wellness and school wellness? It sure seems like it's,
They're not, you actually can probably collapse them down into each other once the committee convenes and they make a recommendation and do that. But without a committee in place, I wouldn't touch anything that's there.
understood.
So should we bring 458 to the board right away so we can get that approved, start that process?
You can, I don't
Yeah.
think there's anything in there, and I can still convene a committee on wellness without, this is just giving me the parameters
Right.
in which to work. And I know these parameters are in compliance with what's expected.
I think in an effort to clean up
Right,
some
Yes.
discrepancies here, let's do that.
okay. So that takes care, I'm gonna take us back up, so we're off the wellness topic, all right? So we're gonna go back up to student health services, 111, emergency, nursing services. Again, that's just template language, to bring you up to date, because it hasn't been looked at in a little while.
So you said that's in row 111?
Yeah, let me go back
Oh, there it is,
up.
yes.
Yep.
I got it.
Emergency, nursing
Nursing.
services,
Mhm.
so that's just draft language.
So like line number 20, it's section 3, the board shall act to approve the emergency nursing procedures that are developed under the direction of a registered nurse. I don't know that I've ever approved emergency nursing procedures in my time on the board.
You don't have to,
Well, it says in
recommended.
the policy that we do.
It's clearly recommended that you do.
So is that something, that, you know, as our new superintendent, if we adopt this policy, is that common practice that we have a plan and it's brought to the board every year to approve it? And
So you do have nursing services report annually, that's
Yeah.
required.
Yes,
So
we-
that could be embedded in there, and you could move to approve the services and accept the report at the same time. So we could do it that way.
I know we approve our district, what do we call it, our facilities, emergency management.
Mhm.
What do we do in case of tornadoes and fires and that, we approve
So a lot
that
of-
every year.
So, yep, so a lot of times I bring forward those prior to the school year starting, so I might have a slate of policies that are always gonna come forward in August, and it's gonna be all those operational things, right? Here's what your assessment cycle's gonna be, here's what our curriculum renewal cycle's gonna be, here's our emergency operations updates, here's that, you know, here was the handbook, all these pieces, and there's just pieces that you just look at every year. So that can be part of that. Or we can look at it and just say, you know what, for first round, we want to have an internal procedural thing. I can talk with them around how much wiggle room we have in that.
This policy, I like the WASB stuff here, but I think there's quite a bit in here that we are not doing. The next one, line number 4, the district shall arrange for a physician to serve as the district's medical
have that.
advisor.
Everyone has that.
We do have that?
I forget the person's name, but yep, Amy
Okay.
secures that annually.
Didn't know.
Every district does have that.
Okay.
The district shall make available equipment, supplies, for providing the emergency services plan. A health room should be designated in each school.
Yep.
Do we have one in each school?
Yep. You
This-
have go bags for emergencies, you have emergency supplies on site. That's part of a couple of different plans.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand your point. We wouldn't want to adopt something that immediately we're non-compliant.
Well, right, that's why I'm kind of reading through the next one.
We very, right.
Is used in the policy, the term site-based first responder is a local term. Let me back up here. The building principal of each school shall always be among the designated staff who are assigned and trained to serve as a site first responder. Is that true in our district?
So you have, each site has an emergency team, and each one, you're part of the CPR group, you're part of the ones who do the training.
We know they're training
Is
right
our
You're
principal?
part of the ones who call 911.
now. We know that, we're doing some again.
Yeah.
as our principal though, because this specifically says the building principal of each school.
I
Will
would
be.
check with your high school, because you're gonna have APs as well, but I believe every principal is. I can't imagine the why behind anyone. I don't think that anyone's,
Sure.
I don't think that anyone's not on that.
I'm okay with this sample policy. It's very, I don't know, it outlines a lot of specific things, and so I just want, like Chris said, to make sure we're,
Voting ourselves into non-compliance.
right.
So, I'm looking at maybe how I wrote this in the past. I had written in providing for the coordination and oversight of emergency nursing services, one or more registered nurses designated by the district shall maintain and coordinate the day-to-day implementation, the procedures, protocols, et cetera. I deferred that to the nurse and had that, and said that they would be in cooperation with the district administrator. Here I would say superintendent, and community health as needed. I didn't take it to the board. So I can do that, make that shift in there, so that you don't have to gloss on that they're just overseen by me and the district nurse.
So that the board is not overseen?
So that you're not approving the day-to-day protocols in that piece. So I can write that a little bit differently there.
I'd like to see that proposed language.
Perfect. Anything else that you'd like to see? Like you said, just going through it with a fine tooth comb, making sure where we've got some wiggle that we're not out of compliance, have the flexibility that we need, and double check on my principles.
Starting on line 44, I mean, it's kind of outlines
Yeah,
the
we got
job
it right there.
description for our district nurse, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of responsibilities that he or she must adhere to in this policy.
Our district nurse is amazing. Just a shout out to Amy Breger, and
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to navigate a pandemic with anyone else. She's
That's great.
top notch.
So for me, 453.1, as long as the administration is comfortable bringing that to the board,
Okay.
I think we're ready for it, as long as,
Sure.
as everything you see in there.
Yep, I can make it into a checklist and have everyone kind of sign off and say like, is this you, principal?
And if you
Ready.
want to reword the
Yeah.
day-to-day, how you, that's fine
Sure.
too.
Sure.
Sounds good. Student medication was still up to date. Looked like those have been revisited a little bit more recently. 458 student wellness we talked about. The 458 that needs to be relabeled is privacy in locker room and restroom facilities. It's currently sitting as 458 for us, but it's really should be labeled as 731.1. So there should be a sample there for you to look at.
On 141.
Line 141?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, line 141. Here, we didn't have this. I'll link these in here. But these were the samples we had to choose from. I'll let you look at them in conjunction with, they're just not linked. I just.
No, they're linked in here.
450, oh, it's down under 731, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, give that back.
I think they're all-
I did notice. All right, so if you go the real 731.1. So we have ours, just kind of generalize, it's locker room and restrooms. So if you want to use the updated language and it expands it a little bit more, designated changing areas, that kind of thing. I just literally gave you the WASB template to look at.
We're looking at sample number 4, just so you, I don't know that you had them
Yep.
all linked in here. but
No,
we have
just the
sample.
one. I went through them all and found the one that most fit us.
All right.
you see the media and all of that, because it's high school post-athletics being interviewed in the locker room, it's recording devices in it, it's those kinds of things. Everyone's barred from a locker room.
Mhm.
So we can use what we have too and just say other changing areas, because sometimes they change in areas other than designated locker rooms.
Do we have,
Old volleyball equipment?
Exactly, random storage area.
when our girls, I'll use the girls' high school basketball team as an example, because I know the coach is a male. When the girls go into the locker room at halftime, does the coach go right in there with them to talk to them at halftime?
I don't see them generally using that space too much, because a
I
lot of
have
times.
seen it with visiting, it's been a long time since I've worked
Yeah.
at a girls' basketball game, Joel. I have seen it by visiting teams, I can't remember, but I believe our
Yeah.
own teams also do it too.
So they have
Sometimes they'll use the
designated
classroom.
areas for that, but at that time, you're not, so a male coach or a PE teacher or anyone, you would not be in the opposite sex locker room or anything like that. You would not be present. There would
Well,
be
certainly not present
Yeah.
when the girls are getting ready for a
No.
game.
Yeah,
But do they holler and say, "Coach, we're ready, come on in"?
Mhm.
Or do they go out to
When they
a-
are using it, I'm guessing often there is, in that case,
they're walking.
there's a female staff member or, we're coming in, we're having a meeting at that point in time.
Yeah, but they don't,
There's
it's
conversation.
only during the game, we can check on that, but
Yeah.
usually
They're not
that's
even
so
recruiting
quick,
from
they don't go
Bring in
far.
post game.
They are, they're coming down to the corner of an area and huddling up and getting as much, interaction with their kids as they can. A lot of times they don't go anywhere. But I'll verify, and then we can look at what does that look like for visiting teams, because we have an obligation to protect any child
Right.
who comes onto our grounds, not just our own students. So I'll double check with them, how they're monitoring that, what signage is there, that kind of thing. I'll take a look.
So looking at the bottom of this policy, is it safe to assume that WASB hasn't really updated sample 4 since January
Right.
15th?
Right,
Yeah.
which is fine, because there's no law, that was the one, I took the most updated one, the others were from 2011, so I took the most recent of them
Mhm.
that made sense for our circumstance, so, and it just means, there haven't been any significant law changes or anything like that.
It kind of addresses what I just talked about on page 2, number 5. When a district employee or other district designated individual enters a locker room, restroom, or other designated changing area in order to exercise their supervisory responsibility.
Gotcha.
So to me, that's a coach, that's a PE teacher.
Mhm.
Man on the floor.
Yeah,
Mhm.
They shall exhibit due regard for the privacy of the individuals who may be using their facility.
right. Coaches, athletic team personnel from being present. It's right in there, right after, calling out coaches too. But I can check on our current practice and how we do that, because this has signage in it, and some other pieces of, how you make sure people are aware of it.
Mhm.
That is something we will need to address,
Yeah, there's no
is the
signage.
signage side of it.
Which I think the existing policy talked about had to be posted in the locker room and published annually, whatever published annually means.
Published annually is generally, so there's a list of annual notices, and we can now put them on our website, and then we call them out fine print in student handbooks, and
Oh.
say, here's your annual notice kind of thing,
Mhm.
and we call that out to them. And then there's certain ones in annual ones, then we would have modules for our staff where they go through and review annual policies, a certain slate of them, staff have to review and sign off. And this would be part of onboarding for coaches with our athletic directors around their responsibilities.
Makes sense.
Because you don't want people, like, you're in right after, no one's changing, and you're celebrating a big win, and someone takes a photo, like, nope, not allowed, not back outside, just making sure people are aware.
Yeah,
Take that in the gym.
yeah.
So I'm good with 731.1 WASB's.
Yes.
If you,
I'll check on practice and see what's needed as far as signage then.
We are now at 6:40. Should we call it a day?
You should call it, because I have nothing left.
Okay.
Did we get through what you wanted to?
Again, you
School
exceeded my expectations, so if I were to give you a grade according to the policy that I have in point, I wouldn't rank you.
There is actually.
We're
one-
proficient.
You are, you're all proficient, you're a virgin.
There is one
maybe quick one, if you wanna take a look at line 118, it's number 460. Awards and scholarships to students. You have an example
Yep.
here. Should we take a quick peek at that?
That's fine, that's, just bringing it up to date. So WASB template language, bringing it up to date, from what was there, and it's, referencing, Tim and I, it was funny, because we had to look into this one, we're like, who knows how old some of ours were, we're like, what is this, Wisconsin Academic Excellence, and all those
Yeah.
pieces. So that is still there, and what I would move is that we get rid of the 460.1 AR, which is going through all the parameters for that scholarship. That's online, that's governed by someone else, I don't need that. It's so
Mhm.
stated in policy.
The draft policy is very similar to ours.
It is,
Just
it's just
updated.
updated.
Okay.
So I'd be fine bringing that one to the board.
Great.
Great.
All right, then for status, the next, like, the 500 series, that needs to be in alignment with all the Title IX stuff, so Lenny and I will bring that forward. 600, you'll recall in the audit findings, there's a couple policies they recommended for inclusion, so we'll review the existing that are there, that are mandated, but I'll probably bring all the 600 series together. Safety, same thing, and then the meal services and all that needs an overhaul. The food services would be a priority, there's things that are not present in there, so I would take care of that first. So
I appreciate this Excel file. I
Yeah.
like how you've linked
Yeah.
ours and linked recommendations. It's clear on,
Well, and even for those of us who know it, hopefully for the public, they can see, and there's just some notes there from the conversation, so it's easy to see for them. The last piece, we've hammered away a lot of the review, revised ones, and then I would just take where we are now, I would fast track those renew revised ones again for another session with us. I'll lay out the ones that we talked about, and that's how I'll build the cycle to go on those two, and then with those couple that we said about fast track, and then I'll lay it out for the scope of the year, for us to attend to those, and then what that cycle of renewals should look like going forward. So if you're okay, based on that discussion, that's some work I'll do and send back to the team for feedback. Sound good?
we're off to a start.
We are off to a start,
A
yeah.
hard start.
Yeah.
Herd of turtles.
That was a lot of good work,
Well,
so
thanks,
I
Rob.
appreciate you
Thanks for your.
wanting to
Yeah.
dig in
Free
your
work.
heels tonight, so.
Yeah,
That was the only thing on our agenda, it's left for you to adjourn.
Are we okay with this committee adjourning?
Yes.
Yes. So we will adjourn here at we'll call it 6:45.